What's up, YouTube? Bay Area Baller back again. Today, I got a very special guest, someone whose work I always enjoy. He covers the 49ers for 49ers Goldmine, Jordan, a.k.a. Splash Cousin. Jordan, with a Twitter handle like that, you had to have played some hoops.
I did, a little bit back in my day. Nothing too serious, but it's like riding a bike. I still got the jump shot, but my knees aren't as forgiving as they used to be. So I don't play as frequently as I used to be. I can hoop a little bit.
We're in that same boat. I'm in that same boat with you, Jordan. Not only, Jordan, you're one of my favorite follows on Twitter. About 11 p.m. a couple weeks ago, you put me onto this quarterback from Liberty. And I've been checking him out. I love the film that you throw up on Twitter. I really enjoy it.
Malik Willis is literally one of my favorite players coming out next year. This guy's arm is insane. And I think because he plays at a smaller school, he hasn't gotten the recognition that he might have to this point. But I have noticed amongst, I try to keep up with a lot of draft Twitter and a lot of the guys whose main focus is just scouting prospects and doing scouting reports, write-ups, and he's starting to gain a lot of steam. The guy just has an insane arm. It's like one of those where it really stands out to you. I don't like comparing it. I'm not comparing him to these players, but it looks like a Patrick Mahomes, Brett Favre level where you're like, wow, this is just some natural inherent talent that can't be taught. And he has a lot of mobility. He's very solid, great feet. So for me right now, he's my second quarterback in next year's class. I have Radler ahead of him still a little bit, but I always think it's never too early to start looking towards next year's draft. Obviously, the Niners aren't going to be in the market for a quarterback next year. You'd like to think probably for the next few years. That's the hope. They don't even have to think about one for a while. But it's still fun to evaluate these guys and look and see how it might shape out and how it might go. I think, it's fun scouting a lot of positions, but scouting quarterbacks is always more exciting just because of how pivotal the position is. So yeah, anybody who has time, if you watch Malik Willis highlights, he plays for Liberty, so it's a smaller school. It's a private school, so they have to kind of work for the opponents that they get. They did play a pretty decent schedule. They played Virginia Tech, they played Syracuse. I think they played North Carolina State last year too. So they do play some Power 5 schools, but they're just I never thought I'd be excited for Liberty football season, but here I am. I can't wait to watch them play this fall.
His highlights looked sick. I haven't done a deep dive and watched any of his full games, but this guy's got all the tools, and like you said, he's got a cannon. And so right now, we got a bit of a hiatus between OTAs and training camp. So what I've been doing, I've been diving into teams' depth charts and rosters just to get a handle on who went where, because in the offseason, man, these moves fly around real quick. So I've been enjoying kind of a refresher. And today we're going to look at the NFC West, and I would love to hear what you got to say about, just players on these four teams.
Absolutely. Did you have any team you wanted to start with specifically, or what your
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just pulled it up right here. We're going to start off with the Arizona Cardinals. And up top, we got the wide receivers. They brought in A.J. Green, DeAndre Hopkins. We know he's a monster. And the depth is just phenomenal because I like Christian Kirk. They bring in Rondale Moore. Let me hear what you think about this receiver core.
So that's probably the strongest unit they have on the team, in my opinion. I was a huge Rondale Moore fan. I thought he would have been perfect for the Niners offense, Tennessee, Green Bay, anybody the Rams even. I'm very happy he didn't end up with the Rams, actually. Any team that runs that kind of Shanahan-McVay tree, just based on what he can do and his ability to separate and be lethal with the ball in his hands after the catch. Andy Isabella is a weird one because he was a guy that was very interesting coming out. He graded, for anybody who's into PFF and stuff like that, his PFF grades were off the charts. He played at UMass, so it's kind of how tough were the DBs he was going against, really. But he's insanely quick. I just don't know that they've figured out the way to utilize him properly, but he's another guy where he's just so fast, you're going to kind of have to respect his speed at a certain point, and Kyler does have the arm strength to get it to him. DeAndre Hopkins, there's not really much I can say that anybody doesn't already know. He's one of the best, if not the best, wide receivers in the league. I still think it's criminal that the Cardinals got him for as cheap as they did. It was a great, I applaud their front office for making that move. It was a great move, but as somebody who's a fan of the team in the division, I hate that it ended up happening. AJ Green's the one that's really interesting because I have always been a fan of AJ Green's. I think that playing in Cincinnati, no offense to Andy Dalton, but having Andy Dalton as his quarterback, they never really got the exposure that a duo like that deserved because the two of them did put up phenomenal numbers. They never won in the playoffs, so I think that kind of hurt them, but they were a perennial contender where they were either in or very close to the playoffs almost every year they played together. And AJ Green was a huge reason why. I just think it's at the point where he's been hurt so much that I wouldn't count on him being the AJ Green that we're accustomed to seeing because he was a top 5 wide receiver, top 3. You could argue he was the best wide receiver in football for a couple of those years. And I just don't see him getting back into that top 15, top 20 range at all, just because he's a little bit older. And
we haven't seen it in 2 or 3 years now.
It's been about 3 years since we've seen anything close to that level of play. And with injuries, I always try to avoid definitives and say that there's no way he can get back to it because it could have just been a situation where he's just been hurt. And you would like to think the talent doesn't just fade away. But until he can string together a stretch of games and stay healthy, I'm just going to be hesitant. Like if it was 4 years ago and I saw AJ Green and DeAndre Hopkins on the same team, I would be terrified if I was playing them. And the team I root for, is playing them. Now it's kind of just like you're going to have to prove it to me again for me to have that kind of worry just because, it's the unfortunate nature of the business. When you get hurt that often, it's just not really striking fear in me. Tyler Boyd kind of took over when they were both on the same field together. It to me, looked like the better receiver of the two. And I know AJ was slowed down a little bit. And the Bengals got into a position where they didn't really even need him with T. Higgins coming on last year too. So I don't think this is like a situation where it's like a star player, bolting for greener pastures. I think it just ended up being, Arizona was willing to take a chance on him. And I forget what his contract is. He's getting a decent amount of money for a guy who's been hurt the last couple seasons. So, as a Niners fan, I hope that he, doesn't turn into the AJ Green of old. But as a football fan,
we hope he's washed. We hope he's washed.
Yeah, we hope he's washed, but it's healthy washed. We hope that, I never wanted the injuries to be the reason why. Or I just hope that he goes up against an Emmanuel Mosley or a Jason Verrett, however the chips may fall, and they're the ones locking him down. The ideal scenario would be him at his best, but the Niners DBs are so good that they're just shutting him down. But, I just that whole receiver group looks good. And then, I still think Christian Kirk's pretty good. I know a lot of people aren't really big on him. I think he can still play. I think especially considering where he's going to be a 4th, 5th wide receiving option. So he'll be all right. The really interesting thing about the Cardinals is that Cliff Kingsbury comes from this air raid Mike Leach offense that's, predicated on spreading the field out, going empty, having 4 wide receivers, 5 wide receivers on the field at the same time. So you'd think that the passing concepts would be very exotic and you get all these different looks that teams aren't used to seeing. And just based on my opinion from what I see, I think that their running game is actually way more diverse and way more complex than their passing game. A lot of their passing concepts are very vanilla and very just, run-of-the-mill, not really going to give defensive coordinators and defensive units a hard time. But their running game is where they really do get creative. And I'd be interested to see if Cliff Kingsbury, after a couple seasons in the NFL, will adapt and sort of start getting a little bit more creative in the air just because he has that transcendent talent in Kyler Murray. And you have that strong receiving unit because, no offense to Chase Edmonds, but James Conner now, those aren't guys that I'm going to be putting, my game. I'm not building my game plan around those guys. If they can contribute, great. I think Edmonds is a very underrated back. He's a good receiving back. But I'm going to want to win games on the back of Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, and if you get a healthy AJ Green. So it'd be really interesting to see if he does spice up the passing concepts a little bit.
And you nailed it. When I see that Arizona offense, I think it looks like a college offense. It looks like it belongs in the Big 12, in my opinion. It's always shotgun. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I see it's a ton of shotgun.
Yeah, they run a lot of shotgun. They run a lot of 3-4 wide receiver sets. They run a lot of empty sets with no running backs. They'll have 4 wide receivers and a tight end. And it's just when you run those concepts in college, because the field is so much, it appears so much wider in college because of how far apart the hashes are. So defenses, it seems like they almost have to defend more ground horizontally. So I think that's why that spread stuff tends to work out better in college. And then on top of the fact, guys in the NFL are smarter, stronger, faster. You're getting the best of the best among college players. So they're going to cover that ground a lot easier too. You're going to get a lot more zone looks in the NFL. That makes it a lot harder to take advantage of spreading those guys out. Because if you're running man every play, it's a lot easier to take advantage of, putting 4 or 5 guys on an island with a DB, safety, linebacker, whatever. So I think that a lot of his stuff that he came in with, like defensive coordinators weren't really taken by surprise by it. And that's why you see a lot of their offense ends up being a play, not necessarily working out right off the bat. But Kyler Murray is so good at buying time with his legs that'll either hurt you by scrambling or buying enough time to make throws downfield as the play devolves and it essentially turns into a scramble drill. Like their most impressive plays to me have come from scramble drills or him literally scrambling for first downs. It's not anything that Cliff Kingsbury's drawing up.
Jordan, absolutely. And that's what I was going to say. I feel like it's hard to do, but if you can contain Kyler Murray in the pocket, you are really limiting his talent because he's most effective on the run, breaking the pocket. Because I was watching, just to get a feel for this NFC West, I watched the Rams versus the Cardinals. It was later in the season, and there was multiple batted balls, and Kyler Murray's throwing balls into the back of their offensive lineman's helmet. It's just being 5'9", 5'10", if you can contain him, it makes things difficult to see receivers down the field.
Yeah, and that's one thing that it's I'm like 6'2", man. I'm not some gargantuan tall person, but I understand there's a huge difference between being like a lot of these quarterbacks. Like I think Jimmy G's 6'3", Trey Lance is 6'4", Goff was close to 6'4", if I recall correctly. Like when you're that height, you can see over the line of scrimmage fairly easy. Kyler Murray is like 5'8", dude. He might even be 5'7" for all we know. A lot of times they boost egos a little bit by giving them a couple inches, on the depth chart. So I think that really does factor into this, where you have to take – and same thing with Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson's like 5'10". He could be closer to 5'9". And I used to think, no, these guys make the throws. That's not really an issue. But if you watch closely, the plays where they are confined to the pocket and they are stuck behind these offensive and defensive linemen who are 6'5", 6'6", some even close to 6'7", and they're these just huge human beings too. They're not just tall or wide. It really does limit what they're able to do. And I think that there actually is a conversation to be had where are Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson and some of these shorter mobile quarterbacks bailing on plays out of the pocket even when there's no pressure simply because they can't see over the line of scrimmage. And it's not me trying to make jokes about him being short or being small. It's a literal physical limitation I feel like that exists there because there's times where I'm watching, and again, sometimes quarterbacks can feel pressure and sense pressure that isn't there, but there's times where I'm watching these guys and they're bailing on completely clean pockets to run out and make throws outside of the pocket. And I genuinely am starting to believe that there are times where they're literally just blinded by having bigger people in front of them that they can't see over. And that, just like you're saying, that's when it almost benefits you to do a contain rush almost off the edge instead of getting upfield. Like I think one of the reasons why Kyler Murray has gashed the Niners so much is because the Niners run that wide 9 technique on the defensive line where it's just pin your ears back and get upfield as quick as you can. And they're getting upfield so quickly because A, they have very good D linemen. B, the Cardinals' offensive line isn't very good, particularly at tackle. So you're getting upfield very quickly, but Kyler has the ability then to step up, find these little holes. And the benefit of being a smaller, craftier guy like that is he's going to find gaps that other guys might not. And it's extremely frustrating to watch as a fan. So I can only imagine how it is as a defender. When you do everything right and you're beating the tackle off the line of scrimmage, you're winning your one-on-one rep, and this shifty little quarterback is scrambling for 15, 17, 20 yards, whatever you're in there. So, yeah, I think that after a couple seasons.
It's so annoying. It's so annoying to defend. It's like you think you got him. He squirms through the gap, and then he's off to the races because he is so quick.
He is, and he's a tremendous athlete. That's the thing. Again, I understand he's a little bit limited in height, and I think that's why there was even a question if he would go number 1 the year he did, just because people were a little thrown off. If he was 6'3", he would have been one of the most touted prospects in a long time. but that does have its advantage too. And he was a baseball player too. And I think that that's a very underrated skill set to have, because we see him specifically. He's so good at getting to his spots and then sliding and avoiding contact and avoiding these big hits. Because we saw RG3 never really knew how to slide, ended up taking a big hit. It really cost him. I love Lamar Jackson. There's times where Lamar Jackson's taking these huge hits where I'm like, man, I don't know how many of these can keep piling up over time. And having that ability to slide and still, and it's so funny because, again, like, he's so much small. It's not that he's just this tiny person. Like, he's like average height for a lot of male adults. But there's some of these defenders are so big that when he's going to slide under them, they're completely whiffing and like coming up trying to tackle air, basically, because you go to wrap up this dude, and next thing you know, he's sliding beneath you, getting an extra 3 or 4. You know what I mean? Like, it's wild to me. So he's really fun to watch. I just hate watching him do that to the 49ers. When he's doing it to Seattle or the Rams or another team, I thoroughly enjoy it. But yeah, I hope the Niners have a little bit better game plan for what they're going to do with him this year.
I agree. And then I want to touch on the O-line just real quick. As a whole, as a unit, how would you rate the Cardinals' offensive line?
I mean, they got Rodney Hudson from the Raiders in the trade, so their center position is definitely the strongest on the line. In my opinion, Hudson's been a solid player. I don't think he's going to be at the level he was when he was, I believe he was a Pro Bowler a couple seasons ago. I don't think he's going to play that high of a level. He's getting up there in age, but he's a solid veteran. He's a dependable player. He's an upgrade to what they had before. But other than that, there's nothing really on this line that I'm looking at, and I'm like, oh, this is striking fear into me. And it's one thing that it's tough because I really liked Zaven Collins. I liked their first-round pick this year. I was a huge Zaven Collins fan. He went a little bit earlier than I expected him to. And then Isaiah Simmons last year, like, I was intrigued by his ability to be versatile, and he's extremely fast, and he can tackle, and you might play him at safety, you might play him at linebacker. He even played slot corner. But it's incredible to me that they made this investment in Kyler Murray in 2019, and they have not used either of their last 2 first-round picks on an O-lineman when there were good, solid O-line prospects available, in my opinion. So I'm wondering if that's going to come back to bite them, because that's an issue that I've seen, and we can talk about it when the Seahawks come up. I think the Seahawks have taken a conscious approach where they're like, Russ is bailing on clean pockets a lot of time, even when he does have a clean pocket, and we're paying him an insane amount of money to be our quarterback. So we literally cannot invest the resources we want to in the O-line. So we're just going to the fact that we have a mobile QB, it kind of allows you to play with slightly less skilled offensive linemen, just because that mobility is going to allow them to escape pressure and evade pressure the way non-mobile quarterback wouldn't be able to. So I'm wondering if the Cardinals are in that same mindset now, where they're like, hey, we've seen this shifty little dude evade pressure every way possible. He's going to scramble around on his own. We don't need to invest this high capital in an offensive line. But again, when you're playing Aaron Donald twice a year, when you're playing Nick Bosa and Eric Armstead, and hopefully Kinlaw takes a step forward, like when you're playing these guys a couple times a year, it would really behoove you to invest in that offensive line. And I'm wondering if that's something that's going to end up being the fatal flaw of this Arizona team, which top to bottom looks pretty good. They have a couple areas of concern. Like the secondary, I don't think is great.
Yeah, I want to run through the defense real quick. Yeah. So the D-line, Zach Allen, Fotu, they brought in J.J. Watt, and then Chandler Jones is a monster. I love Chandler Jones. So they got the bookends. Linebackers, you already addressed, Zaven Collins, and I really like Isaiah Simmons. At least I did at Clemson. I thought he was electric and just he could do so many different things. But as you mentioned, they passed on some really good offensive line prospects. I really liked Jedrick Wills. I believe he was taken ahead of Wills. There was numerous tackles that he was taken ahead of. But also on the
it was short-lived because Bosa obviously got hurt. It's a game people don't want to think about. But if you go back, anybody who has Game Pass or you have the ability to watch, I can like bump it if I think I tweeted it before. They had 4 or 5 pass rushing reps. Bosa and Mekhi Becton did in that Jets game week 2 last year, and Becton was serving Nick Bosa. Like it wasn't that's holding his own. He was winning those reps convincingly. So I'm very, very happy and very thrilled that he ended up a Jet and he isn't on the Cardinals, where it's going to give Nick Bosa more of a hard time getting to the quarterback. So yeah, I think, and then Wills has obviously been really good for Cleveland. And Simmons could end up being a good player. It's year one. I don't like rushing to say it was a bad miss after 1 year. There's plenty of guys that have taken a couple years to develop. It's just the theory of ignoring the O-line and then being like, well, our quarterback's always under pressure. Like, how did this happen? Like, well, because you ignored addressing the offensive line and you're drafting inside linebackers in the first round every year, which is a position, it's just a position that I don't think you need to address that early. But, it's not my team. It's Steve Kimes' team. So,
yeah, it feels like Kimes has been there forever. All right, this secondary, let's dive into the secondary real quick because I want to move to the next team. But Malcolm Butler, Byron Murphy, what do you see in this secondary? And Budda Baker, of course. Budda Baker's a phenomenal player.
Yeah, Budda Baker. Yeah, I'll start with that. Budda Baker is one of the best safeties in the league. I love watching him play. I think that he is just a phenomenal overall talent. Very, very hard-hitting safety, really good tackler, great against the run, good in coverage. He's a phenomenal player. The secondary is very interesting because I think that Byron Murphy's a good slot corner. Guys like Alford and Butler are obviously, not the player they may have been a few years ago, but I think they still have a little bit left in the tank. Butler's been solid for Tennessee. He hasn't been great, and I don't think he's been bad. But,
we should be able to expose that secondary a little bit. We should be able to expose it.
And I think that they'll definitely take shots at the linebacking core specifically. Like, that's what we saw last year. Like, one of the first plays on the second drive, I think it was the first play of the second drive in that week 1 game. They ran the choice route out of the backfield with Raheem Mostert, and they had Kyle got him one-on-one with Isaiah Simmons. And it was kind of like a, hey, welcome to the NFL, Rook moment where he just, got a little bit of separation on that choice route, sold it to the outside, cut back in, and he ends up taking it for a 75-yard touchdown.
You ain't catching Raheem. No, nobody's catching Raheem.
The unit that does intrigue me, and I saw the question earlier about J.J. Watt, the defensive line, I think it's very interesting because I think Chandler Jones has been quietly just one of the best players. I mean, I don't know about quietly. A lot of people who are super into football appreciate how good he is, but he's not getting the love that, like Khalil Max and, like Myles Garrett and some TJ Watt, some of these guys get when he's been as productive as any of those guys mentioned. He's a phenomenal player. And I think the thing with JJ Watt is that they have the ability to do what the Niners do with Armstead, where they can play him outside on early downs. He can defend. He's still a very solid defender against the run. The biggest thing with J.J. Watt is that I think as he's gotten older, he's winning much more frequently on the inside than he is on the outside. So his ability to kick inside on passing downs will be very interesting, and I'd be very interested to see if they have him line up on the same side as Chandler Jones. Marcus Golden is also another player who's a solid edge rusher who can come in on those obvious passing downs and give him a hard time. So they're a team where while their secondary isn't, blowing anybody away, I don't think it's, this transcendent group. I still don't think it's a team where you want to be in a position where it's 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, and you're clearly going to be passing the ball because it's going to be a defensive line that's going to be fueling that defense, in my opinion. And then Zaven Collins is a really interesting player because he's listed as an inside linebacker, but he's 6'4", like 265, and he moves like I don't think I've ever seen a player that big move the way he has, which is why I was so high on him. I think he could end up playing that opposite edge. So if you end up in a situation where you have Golden, Watt, Chandler Jones, and Zaven Collins all rushing QB at the same time, I think it'd be a nightmare for Jimmy, Trey Lance, Russell Wilson, Matt Stafford, whoever they may be going against in a given week. You're not going to want to go up against that unit.
Wow, that's an interesting point. We'll have to watch out for that Arizona D-line. And Tay Gowan, I know PFF really liked Tay Gowan. That's about all I got for you, Tony.
I don't think he will this year, but I think he has the chance to. And if I recall correctly, Malcolm Butler's deal was 1 year. I think Alford's was too. So I could definitely see a path where if Gowan looks impressive, they phase him in towards the back end of the season, and then they plan on having him be the guy moving forward for the next 3 years while he's on that rookie deal.
Absolutely. Now let's dive into the Rams. Now they got 2 really good receivers, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods. Van Jefferson's going to get a chance to step up to the plate with Josh Reynolds gone. And this is a team that lost a lot of talent just across the board. I mean, let's rattle off some of these names. The safety, Johnson, Brockers was a really good defensive lineman. This team, the depth, I feel like, is depleted.
So that's what's very interesting about the Rams. The Rams are a team that, well, if you look at the top, they look very good. Like, they still have a very strong team. They obviously have the star power in Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald and Matt Stafford. And we know how good those receivers can be. And McVay is a great play caller. They have a lot of things going for them. But the biggest thing that's going to get me is how is that defense is almost assuredly going to regress, because it's very rare that you see a defense, even the great defenses like the Bucks in the early 2000s, the Ravens, the Bears, all these teams that had these great defenses, they might have maintained a top 5, top 7 ranking, but there hardly ever is a defense that's number 1 back-to-back years. So it's almost like a guarantee the Rams will regress, literally, because it's that hard to be just the best defense again. But I'm interested to see how much they regress, because you mentioned they lost John Johnson, they lost Michael Brockers, they lost Troy Hill, who was quietly a really good corner for them as well, and they lost Brandon Staley, who had this really great mesh of kind of Vic Fangio, who 49ers fans remember, who called some great defenses for us, kind of a mix of his system and a lot of what Nick Saban does in coverage, and it was kind of the best of both worlds, and he really was kind of ahead of the curve. Generally, offenses are the teams that are the units, that are setting the tone, and defenses have to react. The defenses catch up. When I was watching the Rams last year, it really felt like Brandon Staley was ahead of a lot of these offenses with the coverages he was calling, with the defensive fronts he was throwing out there. So I'm really interested to see what Raheem Morris, the new defensive coordinator, who's been in the league for a long time, has been a head coach, is definitely a guy who has a lot of respect around the league. I don't think it's just going to be this huge drop-off, but I think there are some huge shoes to fill on that defense. But while you have Aaron Donald and while you have Jalen Ramsey, it's just going to put you in a position where those guys are going to command so much attention that it's going to make other guys better. But I am with you. I think the depth is going to be a little bit – it's going to be concerning that the depth really isn't there. And then you also have the guy that was pulling all the strings for this number 1 defense last year, who's now the head coach of the Chargers. So I think the defense is going to be where they really struggle. The offense, I expect to actually take a step forward, just because I think that I'm wearing my Cal shirt right now. I like Jared Goff, but I don't think he's the same caliber of quarterback that Matthew Stafford is. So I'm kind of terrified to see what McVay is going to do with a guy like Stafford, just because of the arm talent he has. I don't think he's like remarkably, more efficient or anything than Goff is. I think Goff actually gets kind of a bad rep just because of how he played the last couple of years. But, they got to a Super Bowl with him. We saw when Goff was on, he was more than capable of starting NFL quarterback. I just think that Matthew Stafford has the arm talent to allow him to get a little bit more creative. His biggest thing is just staying durable, in my opinion. I think that a lot of his inconsistency stemmed from the fact that he was getting hurt quite a bit, and he was just so tough that he was still out there playing with torn ligaments in his thumb and injuries with his back and his shoulder and all these things, where he's not making the excuse. But I think that has a lot to do with his play. And I just think he was also inconsistent, just not making excuses for him. There's a lot of times where he was week to week, his efficiency would fluctuate. So, that's the interesting thing with me with Stafford, because if you look at him, he has all the arm talent in the world. The guy can make throws. The only other quarterbacks, I think, in the league that are on the same par of arm talent are Mahomes and Rodgers, just purely based on the angle, the difficulty, the depth, so many of the things he can do with his arm. He's in that elite tier, but the other guys have the efficiency and the consistency, which is what separates them. And as much as
the other guys get more primetime games, and they go deeper into the playoffs. So we see, he's hiding up in the NFC West, the NFC North for so long that we missed out on seeing that cannon, because you're absolutely right about that.
And the thing is too is how much do we put into the fact that the Detroit Lions, no offense to anybody who's a Lions fan out there, I hope they turn it around. How much stock do we put into the fact that team has been tanking Hall of Fame careers for decades now? And the fact that they haven't really been able to get it together. Again, I don't want to make excuses, because he has had a couple teams that are very good. People will point out he had Calvin Johnson to throw the ball to. I think even his most recent receiving units, having Galladay, having Marvin Jones, Amendola, a lot of these guys he was throwing to, they're not scrubs. But I just wonder, who's the most creative offensive mind he's worked with? In my eyes, it's Jim Caldwell, and they didn't really have that much time together. The short time they did have, I think they went 9-7, and the year he got fired. They weren't a great team, but they also weren't awful. But he's had guys like Jim Schwartz and Rod Marinelli, and most recently, Matt Patricia, a lot of defensive-minded guys. So I'd be really interested to see what goes on when he's getting a head coach and a play caller who really has established themselves as a bright offensive mind, who has the creativity and the ability to really, take an offense to another level. So that's one of the things I'm most excited about to watch this year, is what are McVay and Stafford, what's that pairing really going to look like?
Absolutely. And I feel like the offensive line for the Rams usually gets a bad rap, right? Now, how do you think it kind of stacks up now?
So Whitworth has been insane. Like nobody, like at a certain point, he's going to have to just regress because the man's going to be 40 this year during the season. Like I don't think I can't remember the last time I've seen an offensive line play as well as he's played this late into their career. I don't want to doubt him, but I'm not going to count on him to continue to play at that high level. It's just unrealistic to expect a 40-year-old man who has that many miles on his body at the NFL level to continue to play at the high level that he's played at. So he's the strongest, like the anchor of that line, in my opinion. Still, I believe he's still a team captain. So he still is going to command a lot of respect from defense, command a lot of respect in the locker room. But just from a purely play standpoint, like talent on the field, the unit as a whole really doesn't do much for me. I think that they played a lot better this past season than they did in 2019. They had a really rough year, which is part of the reason why I think they missed the playoffs. That O-line just was depleted, and the guys that were filling in weren't great. I think Corbett's taken a step forward. Havenstein has played a little bit better. And then, this is a great point, too, about losing the center. The center does so much for them that it's going to be interesting to see how whoever ends up winning that job stepping in does. But, yeah, it's more just like, can they not be a detriment? Like, I don't think it's going to be a strength of the team, but as long as they're not the reason that they're losing games, which is what I think happened in 2019, I think that they'll be okay. But, like, if we're comparing them, like, head-to-head, like, the 49ers have a much better offensive line, in my opinion. I think even Seattle, you could argue, has a better line than them, in my opinion. And that's where it's kind of like these are the little things where, while, there's questions around the quarterback room and what's going to happen, this is where I'm feeling confident as a 49ers fan that the depth of all these units, they just seem stronger to me. While some of these other teams may be more top-heavy, the Niners have a stronger offensive line. In my opinion, they have a stronger defensive line. And having that strength in the trenches, I think, goes so far in this league, especially now with the longer seasons. It's going to be very key to have that depth and have that strength on the front on both sides. So, like the line doesn't really do anything for me. The skill position group is really what I think stands out. Like now, I would take A.J. Brown and Julio Jones over anybody in terms of just pure receiving, duos.
That's a scary tandem, yeah.
Yeah, and like Lockett and Metcalf are obviously very good. Godwin and Mike Evans are very good. Landry and Beckham, when they're healthy, are very good.
Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, Thielen and Jefferson. Yeah, it's another really good. But Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, in my opinion, I've argued, and I floated it out there last year. A lot of people disagreed. I said you could argue that they are the most complete wide receiver duo in the league. And my reasoning is that they both do so many things very well, and they're both very similar. They both can run that motion pre-snap. They both can dominate you after the catch if you get them in space. They both have dependable hands. And it puts you in a position, while they may not be like this bona fide wide receiver one that's a DK Metcalf or a Julio Jones or a Michael Thomas, whoever you want to throw out there, but they're both, it's like having 2 1Bs almost. And I think that's almost harder because if you try to take away a Cooper Kupp, then Robert Woods ends up torching. If you try to take away a Robert Woods, the other guy ends up torching. And it's really hard to try to decide, in my opinion, when you are game planning for these guys. Who am I really going to focus my coverage schemes on? Who am I really going to make an effort to take away? Just because they're both, like I said, they're both not transcendent players, but they're both highly above average players who I don't think get enough credit, particularly Robert Woods. Like Robert Woods might be the most underrated player in the league, in my opinion, just strictly based on the production he puts out every year and how dependable he's been since he's come to the Rams. And I'm a big fan of Van Jefferson's too. I think that he's going to end up slotting into a nice role with them. Again, I will pull for any Cal guy. I love Deshaun Jackson. I don't know how much he has left in the tank, but if he has anything to offer them just in terms of stretching the field a little bit, it'd be very interesting to see how they work him vertically while having Kupp and Woods working horizontally. So the skill position group looks really good. And I think Higbee is a decent tight end too. McVay doesn't really seem keen on getting the tight end involved on a consistent basis.
And they lost Everett. I did like Gerald Everett, who's staying in the division. We'll talk about him in a second, but they lost Gerald Everett. Now, we got to touch on the running backs real quick because they got a tandem that I think is a bit underrated. Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson are two running backs that I think they're pretty good.
Yeah, Akers. So Akers is really interesting to me because I thought with him coming, I played dynasty football, so I spent a lot of time watching college strictly based on my own selfish interest of trying to get ahead of rookie drafts and stuff like that. And while everybody was focused on Jonathan Taylor and Clyde Edwards-Helaire got a lot of late love, I thought that Akers was the most complete back coming out of that class, and I thought that Florida State, while they've just been, sorry if there's any Florida State fans watching, they've just been a mess for whatever reason since Jimbo Fisher left. And the offensive line looked awful. The offense as a whole didn't look great with Akers, but he had really good hands, very good runner. And I thought despite the bad O-line play, he still looked really good. So I was literally, for my fantasy football selfishness, I was very happy when he went to the Rams because I'm like, okay, this is a great landing spot for him. But from just a purely 49ers fan, selfish standpoint, I was very worried because I think he's a guy, while he may not be what Todd Gurley was before his knees gave out, he's going to give them that level of consistent production, in my opinion. And I think, we as 49ers fans give Shanahan a lot of credit for putting players in a position to succeed. And I think that Sean McVay deserves as much, if not more, of that same credit as well, where you can really just plug guys into that system and he's going to put them in a position to produce. But Akers showed down the stretch last season and into the playoffs. He's a guy who really can be a dependable workhorse. And then you have Henderson with that change of pace, quick twitch. I think he's an underrated receiver. I think he brings a little change of pace to what Akers is doing. So, yeah, I'm not thrilled to see this offense. I think that it's going to, watching that Niners defense versus that Rams offense is going to be one of the more intriguing matchups I think we see during the season. And seeing the chess match between Sean McVay and what DeMeco Ryans is going to be doing as a first-year defensive coordinator will be very fun to watch. The skill position guys are really what gets me. But if the Niners can dominate in the trenches, which I believe they will be able to, just again, because this Rams O-line, I don't know what to expect. Is it going to be even closer to the 2019 year when they were a little bit of a detriment to the offense? Are they going to, maintain that kind of average level of play they had last year where it was good enough just to get them into the playoffs because they weren't losing them games? That, to me, I can't confidently give a prediction where I think it's going to go one way or the other. I think it'll fall a little bit closer to that 2019. I think they will regress a little bit from last year, but I'm not expecting them to be, costing them games the way it didn't look like it was happening in 2019, where they had injuries and the guys who were playing were just getting beat so badly that, Goff was essentially just taking free rushers on a lot of the time.
Absolutely. I really love that input. Now, moving to the defense, they got two guys. When I'm looking at this D-line, they got two studs. Obviously, one of them is arguably the best defensive player in football, and that's Aaron Donald. But Leonard Floyd is also a really good pass rusher, really good player. But outside of that, A'Shawn Robinson, Sebastian Joseph Day, Okoronkwo. I botched that one, Jordan. But what do you see from this defensive line outside of Aaron Donald and Leonard Floyd?
So the interesting thing with Aaron Donald is, and this is another reason why I hate using sacks to measure any kind of pass rush production, D-line production, outside linebacker, edge, whatever. I hate using sacks because sacks are so dependent on the supporting cast. So you have a guy a couple years ago, if you remember, Dante Fowler gets traded to the Rams. He comes in. I forget what numbers he put up, but he put up respectable numbers. He ended up generating a lot of sacks. He ends up signing a contract with Atlanta, and immediately when he doesn't have Aaron Donald next to him, he regresses significantly. He's not posting the same sack numbers. He's not posting the same, box score production numbers. But if you look closer at the pressures, his pressures were pretty much the same in Atlanta as they were in LA, meaning his individual production didn't change much. The difference is when you have Aaron Donald on your team and the guy's getting doubled every snap and on some plays is getting triple teamed, eating up the majority of an offensive line by himself, it's going to open up opportunities. Like I don't think I've ever seen a player command as much attention against an interior offensive line the way that Aaron Donald has in his career.
Yeah, like, if you're trying to block this guy one-on-one, you are asking for trouble.
Unless you're Daniel Brunskill. Daniel Brunskill seems to be a but, that's a discussion for another day. But yeah, like that's one thing for me that it's fascinating to watch because there's a lot of guys. Lawrence Taylor is, in my opinion, still undisputedly the best defensive player of all time. Deion Sanders, if you're more of a coverage guy, has an argument too. I wouldn't be upset at either answer. But right beneath that, Reggie White was a phenomenal player. I I think that Aaron Donald, if he maintains this productivity over the next few seasons, has a serious case to be made for one of, if not the greatest defensive players of all time. So having said that, and again, that's no disrespect, I still think Lawrence Taylor and Deion Sanders are marginally ahead of him. But I think that at a certain point, he's due that respect, just having seen this year in, year out. And if you have him on your team, it makes it easier to have lesser-known players on the line. Because, again, if you look at that unit, nobody else is really jumping out at you. Leonard Floyd is a former first-round pick. He has a lot of physical gifts. He's another guy where I'd be really interested to see if you took away Aaron Donald, is he posting the same pressure numbers and the same sack numbers that he would get with the benefit of having somebody like Donald command so much attention? I personally don't think he would. But again, that's
Bears fans will tell you the answer is no.
Exactly. So that's the Rams. And hey, they have Aaron Donald, so they don't have to worry about these hypotheticals that I'm throwing out there. The group that really gets me is the linebacking group, and I think that is where it's almost like the Rams have subscribed to this theory that I know a lot of analytics people think. I'm into analytics myself. I try to stay plugged in, but I don't subscribe to everything that they float out there. But I do know a lot of analytics people think that linebackers in particular, there's a couple guys. There's Darius Leonard, Fred Warner, Levante David. Some people really like Devin White.
Bobby Wagner.
I'd say. Like guys you can count on one hand who are just game-changing, transcendent talents.
Let me guess. Otherwise, you tank it.
Exactly. So it's essentially a position that's so hard to hit on and get that elite level player that I'm wondering if the Rams are honestly making a concerted effort where they're like, hey, we're going to invest a bunch of money and capital into the secondary, and that's what they did by getting Jalen Ramsey. We're going to invest in getting a secondary piece for Aaron Donald and invest in Aaron Donald, and that's how they have him and Floyd. And if they've just literally just said, hey, the linebacker position, whatever happens, happens. Because ever since they've, I like Corey Littleton a lot, but ever since they've lost him, it's really just been kind of like a black hole on the roster where there's just this like interchanging group of guys that aren't really household names or not. And it's not that they're not household names, they're guys that just aren't really good NFL players in my, humble opinion for whatever it's worth. And I'm wondering if that's like a concerted effort where and we do know that they're in a kind of a cap struggle. And that's why they've had to let a lot of guys go. So it's not like they're at liberty to spend a bunch of money on linebackers or capital on linebackers, and they're opting not to. But I'm wondering if they've just literally pushed it so far down the list of things that they're concerned with in terms of roster building. Because if you look at that, it's not a great unit. And even now, the secondary, now that Troy Hill and John Johnson are gone, John Johnson, in my opinion, is one of the best. He's top 5 safety in football. And I think losing him is going to be a big loss. I think that's one that doesn't
Jordan. Yesterday I was checking out. Friday I was looking at the AFC and the Browns. The Browns are freaking loaded.
They have a very good team. They've done a very good job building, and that defense in particular, they've done a really nice job building it together.
Yeah. Okay. Back to the Rams. Yeah, you said the secondary. We know they got Jalen Ramsey in the secondary. What do they have outside of that?
In my opinion, they don't really so it'll be really interesting to see. I like Taylor Rapp a lot. I'd be interested to see if they have Taylor Rapp playing more of a I don't say free safety, but more of a coverage, safety. I think a lot of those traditional free, strong safety, a lot of the traditional positional molds are kind of gone by the wayside. So I'd be interested to see if he does end up getting a little bit more run. I think he's a little bit more athletic. I think Jimmy Lake has done a great job with a lot of those defensive backs coming out of Washington. You've seen Buda Baker come out. I'm a big Elijah Molden fan. I think he'll end up being great for the Titans this year. So, I'm just at the point where, I'm not going to doubt them because consistently every year they end up being a contender. They end up being a team that you have to respect. But I also watched the Niners beat them with a hobbled roster last year twice in a situation where it just felt like they were being out-muscled. And that's the biggest thing for me is I think that the Niners have a strength, a literal strength, I'm not using it as an adjective. They're literally a stronger team across the board, and they have more depth that I think that that's going to ultimately end up playing in their favor when you have these divisional matchups where you're so familiar with scheme and you're so familiar. McVay and Shanahan know what each other like to do. They're very familiar with one another. But when you're able to just kind of beat up another team and punch them in the mouth, I think that the Niners have that ability with their offensive and defensive lines, and I don't feel like the Rams have the same outside of standouts like Aaron Donald and Andrew Whitworth.
Absolutely. I love that analysis, and that's why I brought you on, Jordan, because you're diving deep. I know you know these guys. Let's move to our next team, our favorite team, the 49ers. And the receiving corps, man, it's going to be interesting come cut day because we got 12 or 13 receivers in camp, and we're only going to keep either 6 or 7. So, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, feel like Richie James is a lock. Mohamed Sanu supposedly looking good. Trent Sherfield, we guaranteed $200,000 to, so he might be a potential roster candidate. I think he's a guy who's probably looking at a position to make this team. But what do you think about this receiving core we got?
I think it's good. So I know a lot of people have been freaking out about like what's going to happen behind Deebo and Ayuk. I just don't think that the third receiver spot is so important. Like, I love Kendrick Bourne, and I loved watching him play here. I'm happy he got paid by New England. But if you ask people, 2 years going into the 2019 year, and if you were like, "Oh, it's fine, Kendrick Bourne's there," like, we're fine. People would be like, "What are you talking about, dude? Like, Kendrick Bourne, he's undrafted free agent. Like, they need to get better. They need to have an answer." And Kendrick Bourne ended up being a very dependable third wide receiver. He was great in the red zone. He was great on third downs. So I think it's another situation where there are guys who are there who can definitely, on their own, fill that kind of production that was left. Like Kendrick Bourne accounted for 74 targets last year, and that was a year where Ayuk and Deebo both missed significant time. Kittle missed a good chunk of time. Like these guys were hurt, and he still only really accounted for 74 targets. And he was good in that role, but I'm just saying, like, it wasn't. That's not the plan going into the year. I think the plan was to keep it more to like 45, 50, have it be more calculated stuff on third down. And again, he was really good in the red zone. So between Richie James and Mohamed Sanu, Sherfield, Jalen Hurts healthy, Jennings, White, any of these guys, like it's very easy for me to see a path where you can string together a few different kind of skill sets and easily replicate the production that you were getting already from that wide receiver 3 spot when it wasn't really discussed as much. Like it didn't seem like it was a huge topic of discussion until Kendrick Bourne wasn't brought back and he went to New England. So I'm not worried about it in the slightest. I actually still like it'd be really interesting to see if he stays healthy, but I still think that like, I'm a big believer in Kevin White still. I will hold out hope for that guy until the end just because he has the athletic ability to be a good wide receiver in this league. And I still think that he's young enough that it's not time to call, to close the curtains on it and call it a day and say, hey, you tried all these years, like it's time to hang it up. I just think it's a matter of staying healthy for him. And I think having a year within the system, having a year to get healthy, to me, if he's on and he can stay healthy, would be the most intriguing option and have the highest ceiling as a third wide receiver. The other being Jalen Hurd, if he's able to stay healthy, because we know the plans that they had for him when they got him. He played running back at Tennessee, so we know he's good with the ball in his hands. He's a big guy. He's 6'4". I forget his weight off the top of my head, but I know he's got some good size to him. So it'd be interesting to see. And then, I still think Mohamed Sanu can play. I know people were kind of underwhelmed. He was here for, 2 weeks, I think, last year before he ended up getting cuts. It was a really short amount of time, but he had a really bad ankle injury he suffered in New England. And as the year went on and he got picked up by Detroit, he was in Detroit. Again, they have the Lions, first of all, and second of all, they weren't competing for anything, so a lot of people weren't watching their games. But I went back and I watched a lot of their stuff because when Stafford was on the block and there was a chance the Niners might get him. And Sanu really did stand out to me. He was getting good separation. He's got dependable hands. And again, it's just a veteran presence who's familiar with Kyle Shanahan, who's a guy that knows how to get open. He knows how to beat zone. He knows how to do some of these things. So he might be a little bit older in age. He's another guy that I would feel more comfortable having more veterans in that receiving room. So if Mohamed Sanu ends up being the third wide receiver, I would be thrilled with that personally. I don't think that it's this, bubble we have to look at where his time in New England and his time last year with the Niners when he had that ankle injury he was recovering from. I think that it's easy to get misled to think that, okay, maybe he's, his days in Atlanta, like he's not getting back to that. It's time to move on. I still think there's a reason why the Niners brought him back and he's still on the roster. So, we'll see how it all plays out in training camp. But who they have now is more than fine. Just like you said, it's almost like they have too many guys. They're going to cut a couple guys that I think another team will pick up. Like there's a couple guys that won't make the Niners roster who I believe could make another team's roster. I think that's a great problem to have at any position.
Absolutely. You heard it here first. Jordan's predicting a Kevin White breakout season.
And like I don't know about like breakout, but I think that he's going to be a guy that will. I mean, honestly, if we're comparing it relative to him, if he ends up with like 35 catches for a few hundred yards and a couple touchdowns, like that's a breakout year.
That is a breakout. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, but yeah, I think it's about health with him. If he ends up maintaining that health, I think that there's a skill level that's there where I've seen numerous players speak on it too, where they're like Kevin White can play. It's just a matter of him staying healthy. It's never been a question of.
And I had heard rumblings that when we had that whole COVID situation in the receiver room, that some guys on the team were like, "Why are we bringing up River Craycraft and not Kevin White?" I had heard something about that.
I think the issue, if I remember correctly, with that the issue with the COVID rules was that after you brought a player up a certain amount of times, they had to stay on the 53-man roster because there was weird practice squad rules last year. So I think that it was more so based on the strategic, the Niners not wanting to, I guess, make that. And I'm just speculating. I don't know for sure. I'm not saying like I have the insight into this, but I'm wondering if maybe they just weren't ready to make that commitment to keep Kevin White on the full 53-man roster, because if they ultimately were to move on from him after, or they cut him for it, if it's like, hey, it's not working out, another team then is able to scoop him up. Whereas if another team wanted to pluck him off the practice squad, they would then have the ability to look inward and say, hey, are we willing to let him go? Do we want to pull him up and bring him? Like, it leaves a little bit more leverage on your side in that situation, just based on like the last year was weird practice squad rules. So luckily you don't have to worry about it this year. But yeah, it was strange. And I think Craycraft is decent too. He's a good route runner. He's good in space. Again, not a wide receiver one by any means, but a guy who can come in on third downs in short yardage situations and, just win, particularly if he's lined up and he gets man coverage. I think he's a guy who's shifty enough to win in short area. He has a good quick burst to him. And again, Kyle's going to put these guys in a position that a lot of play callers, offensive coordinators, whatever, aren't. He's so good at dialing up these plays and beating specific coverages and getting guys into space that as long as they're able to execute at like a baseline level, they're going to find success. And that's why when I go through that receiver room, I don't see anybody where I'm like, oh man, like I just don't think this guy's capable of being, an NFL player. Like I'd be really interested to see too what ends up happening with Austin Watkins. I know like Javi from Gold Mike, Javi's been on Austin Watkins for 6 months. He saw him at the Senior Bowl and he fell in love with the play that he saw there. Watkins is a guy who I think has good size, good hands. He came from a smaller school in UAB, so he may not have gotten the publicity, but he's another guy where I wouldn't be shocked at all if he made the team, just because I think he could be that same mold that Kendrick Bourne was, where you get this value of an undrafted guy. He contributes for a couple years. And then, if he ends up, my whole thing with Kendrick Bourne is, I'll say real quick too, the Niners won that transaction like in an incredible way. They get an undrafted guy. He comes in. He contributes to a team that makes a Super Bowl run. He's consistently, like I said, a weapon in the red zone, a weapon on third down. You're not paying him a lot of money because he's on that undrafted scaled contract. He's on that rookie contract after that when you start getting him into more guaranteed stuff. And then you get to a point where right now it's time to really pay him. And you're like, you know what, we just, the money doesn't work for us. We're happy. Go get your bunny from New England. And they essentially got 4 years of production for a guy they spent zero draft capital on and very little actual money on. And if they get that same kind of deal from a J1 Jennings or an Austin Watkins, like that's a very reliable model for team building over the long term. Having guys come in that you're investing very little capital on and you're getting great return on your investment.
Absolutely. When we move to this offensive line, let's go. Let's just talk about him as a unit. I'm so excited about Alex Mack coming in because the center position has been a bit of a dark hole with the round table that Richburg has been. But Alex Mack should solidify that line, and having a utility guy like Brunskill, like I feel like Brunskill is the backup at every position. Like all 5 positions, Brunskill's next in line. And for the swing tackle, we just lost Justin Skule, a guy that I feel like hasn't been getting much pub, that I'm still holding out some hope for, former 3rd round pick by the Browns, and that's Sean Coleman. So let's talk about this unit as a whole. And what do you think about Sean Coleman potentially being a swing tackle?
So I think that this is what's going to be really interesting. I think it all starts at that right guard spot. If Aaron Banks ends up coming in and just blowing them away, because he's got good feet, he's got good size. I think he's more than capable of getting out in space, running some of the outside zone stuff there. And he's just a massive human being. Like I'm not gonna lie, that pick took me by surprise. When I was doing all my pre-drafts,
I was watching that. You and Brad were on. I was with you guys all of day 2 because I was driving home and it was like looking for draft coverage. I was like, Jordan and Brad are linking up. I'm tuned in. So I was listening to you for that Banks pick. Continue.
Yeah, so I was completely taken aback by it, to be honest. I did hundreds of hours of scouting and watching film and grinding, trying to figure out who not only the Niners would draft, but other teams would draft. I can admittedly sit here and with a straight face say I didn't spend a second thinking about Aaron Banks going to the Niners just because all the guards that I, mocked to them or, had them, fitting with them were smaller, more fleet of foot guys based on what Kyle's done. And I thought that Banks pick really emphasized that he wasn't going to be pigeonholed into the same mold and he'd be willing to adapt a little bit. And I think that getting a guy that's that big that can win with more power than finesse really was a statement that Kyle was making where he's not going to be limited into this just box of I've done this before, so this is all I'm going to do going forward. So the Banks pick completely took me by surprise. So the first thing that Brad and I did when he got picked was we started pulling up any Notre Dame tape we had and started watching because I know Brad's an offensive line genius. He played O-line in college. He's the guy I deferred to all that. And I know he watched Eichenberg from Notre Dame. So I watched Notre Dame for Tommy Tremble, but I never really paid attention to Aaron Banks. But when I was zeroing in on him specifically, he is a massive human being. He's like 6'6", 335. And it's not like, I know a lot of guys are close to that, but he is huge. It's the same thing when you see Javon Kinlaw. It's that old cliche. I don't know if you know this, the get off the bus test when you see an opposing team come in and some of these guys getting off. If you saw Javon Kinlaw and Aaron Banks getting off the bus, I'd be a little intimidated as another team. I'd be like, holy shit, these are big guys, So I think that the size is very intriguing. He might have a little bit of technique. He might have to learn the system, the cadence, some of these other things. But if he ends up winning that right guard spot, then I think it puts Daniel Brunskill in a position because, again, I think Daniel Brunskill is a very good player. I'm a fan of Daniel Brunskill's. I think that it's not fair to him to judge him on last year's play at right guard because he was taking snaps at center in camp. He was taking snaps at guard. He was taking reps at tackle. He had to play tackle the year before when Staley and McGlinchey went out. He's kind of just been there to do whatever they've asked of him, and he's done a fairly good job for the most part at all those positions. So if he gets a full offseason where it's hey, the right guard spot's yours to lose, we're only putting you at right guard. We have Alex Mack now. So I think that, yes, Kendrick Green was I'm happy for him. Pittsburgh's a good spot. I would have loved to see Kendrick Green in a Niners uniform. Ultimately, if Aaron Banks wins that job, I don't think it's a negative thing per se for Brunskill because then I think Brunskill would be that swing tackle utility guy. Or you might end up being able to roster 2 and have him and Sean Coleman be there. And having a guy who's played center, guard, and tackle and has the ability to slot in anywhere is a huge advantage because that's just one spot. Very rarely do you see an offensive line get through the season in its entirety without having a guy or 2 guys here and there go down. So I think ultimately it's Coleman and it is Brunskill who would end up being those guys. And maybe it's Banks for now because Brunskill just does so well in camp that he ends up earning that right guard spot. But having him, I honestly almost feel like he's more valuable as that depth swing offensive lineman because I don't think he's limited to just playing tackle. And having him be able to play multiple positions, you still maintain some value. Because the thing is with Brunskill is he's played well enough that when his restricted free agent deal that he signed this past year is up, he's going to get paid by somebody next year. I don't doubt that for a second. There's so many teams that have worse situations at O-line, and I just don't know that the Niners are going to be in a position where they're I think they have $23 million in cap space next year, and they only have 34 players signed. They're going to have to make some tough decisions next season. They're going to have to get creative with their maneuvering. So guys like Brunskill, unfortunately, it's going to be harder to justify matching those contracts if another team pays them. So if they get into a position where he is just a depth piece for them this year and he's able to slot in and play here and there when guys go down, I don't think it's a terrible thing for the team because, again, they're not investing an insane amount of capital in him cap-wise this year, and he's still maintaining some kind of value where he's demonstrating his ability to play. So maybe a team signs him to play in another position. They'll have him play left guard instead, or they'll have him play right tackle instead. So I like the line a lot. And, again, anybody from Cal I'm going to pull for. Alex Mack coming back to the Bay I'm really excited about. Trent Williams, there's nothing I can say about Trent Williams that people don't already know. He's just a freak athlete in the best way possible. The guys that big shouldn't be able to move the way that he moves. Ecstatic that they locked him up long term. Tomlinson's another guy. I think that they traded a 7th-round pick for him, and he's been a very dependable player for them the last few years. He's another guy where, again, is he a top 5 left guard in the league? I don't know that I would say that, but he's there and he's consistent, and he's a guy that's giving you at minimum average production from that spot, and he's been healthy and available, and I think that that's an extremely important trait. And then, Mike McGlinchey, I know a lot of people don't like Mike McGlinchey, and they think that he's just awful. And my take, I'll say real quick on Mike McGlinchey, is I think that he's always been the same player that he was last year. People just weren't focused on it as much because 2018 was his rookie year, so you're like, oh, okay, he's a rookie, he's learning. 2019, they're in the Super Bowl, they're making this great run, so people aren't really finding things to nitpick about the team. The biggest issue with Mike McGlinchey is, let's say he has 30 pass blocking reps, because I think most people agree he's a really good run blocker. He's among the best in the league. And pass blocking is where there tends to be these issues. And the issue is, let's say he has 30 pass blocking snaps in a given game, and for 27 of them, he is holding his own. He's either winning or at least giving the quarterback time to throw. Nothing's really standing out. But on 3 of them, he's getting pancaked on his back. He's getting thrown around. He's getting beat. I mean, like, there's no other way to put it. It just looks really bad. And what ends up happening is there could be a guy who gets beat twice as many times. Let's say a guy gets beat 6 times a game, but it's it's a little bit more subtle. It's a good move from the D lineman. They hit a swim move or a spin move off the line. Something to shake the lineman. And I think the issue is that Mike McGlinchey isn't terrible. It's just that his lowlights really are low. Like they look really bad, and then that gets ingrained in people's minds. But he's not getting beat at a level that's like concerning, if that makes sense. Like, it's not like he's getting beat so frequently that it's like, man, this guy's terrible. It's just that when he does get beat, it really does stand out. And then it's always easier in life to highlight what people do wrong than what they do right. So when Mike McGlinchey gets thrown down, like I remember DJ Reed basically knocked him on the ground. DJ Reed's like 5'10", 5'9", is a defensive back, and he threw him down. Like, that is what's going to stick in people's minds. And I'm not trying to trash Mike McGlinchey at all. I have spent hours defending the guy because I think he's a great tackle. I'm really glad the Niners picked up his 5th-year option. I hope they extend him. He's great for what they do. But the biggest issue is that people who may not want to take the time to watch all 30 snaps see the 3 that were really, really bad. And then this narrative kind of snowballs into like, well, Mike McGlinchey sucks. And like, that's what gets me, is that he doesn't. He's a good player, but I understand how these narratives come to be formed, if that makes sense. I just don't agree with it at all.
Absolutely. It's like with offensive line, we expect them to do the job and block the man in front of them. So the times they don't are the ones that stand out. It's really a thankless job.
That's a great way to play. It's like a long snapper. How often are you sitting there with a long snapper when they have the perfect snap? The ball is getting right to the punter or the holder, and it's a great kick hold. These extra points and field goals. It's perfect. But the second Brian Jennings had a bad game last year, the sky was falling, and it was like the guy got cut. He didn't even make it into the next week. It's another situation where it's just like there are some jobs in the NFL where you're really not going to get any of the glamour, any of the praise, but the second that you mess up, all eyes are on you. And that I hate to say that is kind of part of the business. Those guys understand it more than anybody. They're living it. But I do have a slight bit of empathy where it kind of sucks, where you're not getting praise. Like, there were plenty of plays I could highlight where Mike McGlinchey's out there throwing a block down at the line of scrimmage, getting to the second level, paving these big glaring holes in the running game. But people don't care about that. They care about seeing these plays.
You see him. I've seen him make phenomenal blocks 20, 30, almost 40 yards downfield, where it's just not many tackles can get to that level, and Mike can. And now I want to move because I'm keeping you longer than I thought I would, Jordan. So I kind of want to keep him.
You're good. Take your time. This is fun. I'm having a good time. So it's all good.
I'm glad. So the tight end position, George Kittle. Phenomenal talent. We love Kittle. We want him to stay healthy. After that, I know we gave some guaranteed money to Michael Pruitt. Now, what do you think about Michael Pruitt and just the tight end room as a whole?
I like Michael Pruitt a lot, honestly. I think that Pruitt is a guy who has a lot of the plus blocking ability that someone like, if everybody remembers Levine Toilolo, who was there the year they went to the Super Bowl. He was a guy who was in there a lot as a complimentary piece. He was generally, when you saw Toilolo on the field, they were going to run the football. And it was kind of a tell almost that it was like the guy's a blocking specialist. He's capable of catching the ball, but almost like I don't have a percentage. I'm just, making this up off the top of it. It seemed like 80% of the time that he was on the field, they were running the ball. And I think that Michael Pruitt is of that same mold, where when you see him on the field, generally that means you're getting a little bit more muscle on the edges. You're going to be running the ball. But I think he has a plus ability to catch the ball. And he's 29 years old. He's still, a younger guy who still has the athletic ability to separate and add a little bit more dynamic ability. I only expect the Niners, and this is where it's going to get really interesting. I only expect the Niners to roster 3 tight ends. I don't expect them to really, go above that. I think Ross Dwelley is pretty close to a lock to making the team. Ross Dwelley is, I know that's one of Grant's favorite players, and I've always kind of appreciated that Grant seems to be like one of the only media members who gives Ross Dwelley love. Because while Dwelley isn't this, we're spoiled. Kittle is a generational talent. He's a guy that, George Kittles don't grow on trees. But Ross Dwelley is a very good tight end as well. He may not be as fast as Kittle. He may not be as athletic, but he has really good hands. And he's a guy that's dependable, that when you throw the ball in his direction, most of the time he's going to come down with it. And those sure hands are extremely valuable. And I think that, Dwelley's a guy that I would prioritize keeping on the team. So I'm looking at it, and, just like you mentioned, Pruitt has the guaranteed money. I think he brings that ability to be that blocking specialist. And what I think is going to end up happening is it's going to come down to him ultimately and Charlie Warner, who was a 6th-round pick last season, who was a good blocking, same kind of thing, blocking specialist at Georgia, put a lot of good blocks on tape there, is another guy who's intriguing to see. I know at camp last year, he impressed a lot of people with his ability. He's got good size. But I agree with B-Money. I think that Pruitt's going to end up making the team, and I don't see Warner making the team over Dwelley. Kittle's obviously making, we don't have to touch that. Kittle's making the team. So it's really down. There's 3 guys, and it's down to 2 spots, and I kind of see Charlie Warner ending up being that odd man out. And it's just another situation where I think they have so much talent that they're in a position.
And Warner's a guy we might be able to sneak onto the practice squad. Being a young guy, you might try to sneak him on. I could see that playing out.
Yeah, and if they are able to do that, that would be great. I'm blanking. I want to say Caden Smith. I'm not getting the name wrong, but the tight end they had out of Stanford.
Caden Smith. Yeah, he's with the Giants now, right?
The Giants, yeah, and he's their secondary tight end behind Ingram. He gets a decent amount of run there. And it was just a situation where the Niners, they prioritized. I think Kyle knew they had a team that could make a run, and they prioritized having a guy that was dependable, that was a veteran presence in Levine Toilolo over keeping Caden Smith. And I'm wondering if the same scenario is going to play out, where you have a guy that Dwelley's dependable, Michael Pruitt's been around. He's been in a similar system with Arthur Smith in Tennessee. There's a couple. I don't have it pinned or anything. I'm sorry, but. On my profile, I had a couple on Twitter that I posted that were a couple clips of him pancaking guys in the run game, getting out and throwing down not just good blocks, but literally putting guys on their back. And he's been a formidable red zone threat too. He has like 30 or 40 catches in his career. It's a smaller number because he is a blocking specialist, but he's shown enough to me on tape where I was excited when they brought him in, and I was excited that a guy like that, who probably could have gone to a couple different teams, prioritized going to the 49ers, knowing that he wasn't guaranteed a roster spot, but still had a very strong chance of making it. And I think that that's a really good thing that's underrated this team has done, is they've become a destination that players want to come to, which we as Niners fans know for a few years was not the case. Unless you were throwing a lot of money at them, that San Francisco was not at the top of their list of places they wanted to go play. And I think that that's changed with the recent success, with the culture they've bred, with Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch and that front office. The way Jed York has supported everybody. I think that it's become a team that's become a desirable destination. So again, it's not, Michael Pruitt isn't a guy that's going to be headline news, but it is a very good thing to have a franchise in a position where these veteran NFL players who are going to generate interest and have respect around the league are prioritizing coming to the Niners. Same thing like Jonathan Cyprien last year. Probably could have found a job on another team where he could have gone to a bad team probably and ended up with a starting role at some point. And he was willing to take a practice squad spot last year. And getting guys like that who've played in the league, who've started and actually contributed at this level, willing to come in, have to earn their stripes on this team, that to me speaks volumes to how far this team has come in the 4 years that Kyle and John Lynch have been here.
Absolutely. And Juszczyk was one of those first kind of, I wouldn't call him a premier free agent signing, but a really good signing. Juszczyk was that first one. And I got to answer my guy Gavin's question because he's been a great supporter of mine. Josh Hockett, man, I went down the rabbit hole of watching as much Josh Hockett film as I could, the little of it that existed. What was it? Fresno State. He was a running back. But not only that, Jordan, I watched this guy wrestle, and he manhandled this gargantuan. He was manhandling this giant on the wrestling mat. And ever since then, I've been sold on Josh Hockett. I actually had a bit of a hot take where I was saying I was okay if we let Juszczyk go to let Hockett fill in. Now, the contract we got Juszczyk at, I feel like actually is pretty good because we can get out of it. I believe it's like maybe in 2023 for a reasonable cost. So to answer your question, Gavin, I think Hockett's going to be on the practice squad. And if anything were to happen to Kyle Juszczyk, I think there's a reason that we're keeping this guy. So if Juszczyk goes down, Hockett's going to get an opportunity.
Yeah, and that would be my whole thing. So I think that they got him when they did, knowing that Juszczyk would be up for a new deal. And I thought that Hockett would be great insurance should they have not been able to re-sign Juszczyk. And I thought there was a path maybe Saleh going into New York where they're going to run a similar system with LaFleur. They're like, hey, kind of doing what the Niners did a few years ago. Let's get this veteran guy who's a smart, heady player who can come in, help the running back room, be a great blocker, great teammate, all these great things Juszczyk is. Last year, I'm not going to lie, I got to a point where I was getting kind of, cynical and trying to be very objective. And I'm like, man, they're not giving that many touches to this fullback they paid a bunch of money to. And the more and more I thought about it, and the more, I take great pride in the info and the knowledge that I bring, but I'm also constantly learning, and I'm always open to hearing other people's opinions. And I had a couple of people kind of point out, like, hey, well, when they gave him this deal, they had a boatload of cap space, and it wasn't like they just were throwing a bunch of money at the fullback position when they couldn't afford it. I'm like, yeah, that's a good point. And then really getting into it, there is so much more to football than just looking at a box score and looking at, this player gets X amount of touches. They're on the field for X amount of snaps. And when Kyle Juszczyk is on the field, the running game success rate by every advanced metric isn't just better, it's substantially better at a rate where he really does bring value that just, again, I was sitting there and I'm like, man, it seems kind of crazy to pay a fullback this much money. I just don't when people were talking about paying, because he was making $6 million a year and he's making about a little more than half that now. When people were talking about re-signing him for that $6 million a year, I was like, I don't see how they could do it with the cap situation. It didn't make sense to me. And I was like, I was one of those people that was like, you know what, you might as well just give Hockett a chance and, thank Kyle Juszczyk. But I think with the value that they got him at, I would have done that. And it's no disrespect to Josh Hockett. It's Kyle Juszczyk is that good. He's so I did a thread, not a thread. It was like two clips. But I posted a couple of clips of him doing when they run that Debo end around and how good he is at selling the run to one side and then spinning and coming around and lead blocking for the reverse coming around the other way. And there are so few athletes in the NFL who could pull off that kind of thing, let alone a fullback. And the fact that he can line up in the slot as a receiver, he can line up in line at tight end, you can hand him off the ball and he can rip off a few yards. Like, he's just so versatile that I'm going to ride the Kyle Juszczyk train until the wheels fall off. But should anything happen to that train, you have a great insurance policy in Hockett.
Absolutely. That was great analysis. Now, moving to the quarterback room, I feel like this Niners team is going to go as far as the quarterback will take us because we have a great team around it. But, if you're rolling out CJ Beathard and Nick Mullins, we're not going anywhere. So that's where I like that we have at least two starting caliber quarterbacks, in my opinion. And I'm a bit higher on Josh Rosen than most. I did a breakdown on one of his starts in Miami. It was against the Cowboys, and he only threw for like 200 yards. And it might have been only one touchdown, but the game is just like, man, Rosen played pretty good. So I'm higher on Rosen than most. But Rosen isn't the headliner. Jimmy and Trey Lance. What do you expect? Do you think – let me tell you my philosophy, Jordan. What I've been saying is you start out with Jimmy, and if he's winning games, you keep rolling with him, all right? If we start out cold, somehow we're 2-4 and Trey Lance is looking good, then you make the switch. But if Jimmy's hot and we're winning games, I think you continue to roll with him. What's your philosophy on how you think we should handle the quarterback room?
So I always want to remain true to my takes, and I want to, if I say something, I genuinely want to stand by it. And anybody who's, I don't know how long, you've been keeping up with what my opinions on stuff like that. Last year, I was very vocal about the fact that I thought that Jimmy was an average quarterback at best, and I thought that while he was not necessarily the sole reason they were losing games, he definitely wasn't the reason they were winning games, and I thought it was time to make a change. I thought it was a situation where I'm like, it seems like this has kind of run its course, and I thought that they needed more. They needed a dynamic playmaker. They needed somebody with a bigger arm, more mobility. So while I still believe, and to be honest with you, the 49ers moving the amount of capital they did to go up and get Trey Lance made me feel a little bit validated that maybe some of those concerns I was having weren't overreactions, and that maybe the Niners felt the same way. And on top of the fact that I think the play was up to par, the injury stuff just on top of it was there. But as time has gone on and I've been able to take a step back from the, riding the Super Bowl high to, having a down year with injuries, I've been able to look at it and objectively, while again, I think that Jimmy is just kind of an average run-of-the-mill quarterback. There's been success when he's played, and there's been a level of success. And I hate he wins when they play. They win when he plays, and they don't when he doesn't. Generally, when you have your backup quarterback playing, there's a reason why they're a backup in the first place, and it's kind of hard to win games with a backup, which is why very few teams do it. So it's not like the Niners had another starting caliber player in there, and they were just awful. But I do think that Jimmy does deserve credit for the times that he has been on the field. They have won games. And I think that, again, like I said, I still think that it's prudent that they make it'd be in their best interest to make the change as quick as possible. But there's something to be said for the fact that, again, Jimmy, when he's been out there, there's been a success, and the players on the team have tasted that success while Jimmy's been on the field, which is why I think a lot of guys would support him being the guy week one and would support him going out there and earn. It's Jimmy's job to lose far more than it's Trey's job to win, in my opinion. I don't think this is a situation where sometimes you draft a rookie and you're just kind of putting them in a better position to wow everybody in camp and win the job. I think it would really have to take Jimmy just being awful in camp and Trey being transcendent for him to get the week one job. And my whole theory on it, too, is that just kind of similar to what you're saying. If you start Jimmy and he plays well, then it's easy to just be like, hey, we don't have to rush Trey Lance in. We're winning games. Everybody's happy. I don't care who quarterbacks the 49ers. You could have the dude in the sourdough Sam mascot outfit, quarterback. If they win games, I don't care, man. So if Jimmy's out there winning games, even as someone who's, doubted his long-term viability, I would gladly eat humble pie and be like, hey, he's proven me wrong. He's playing great. I like this as a fan. Alternatively, if he plays poorly, then you are able to just say, hey, you know what? We tried it again. We're getting the same results we did in 2020 and some of the bad stuff from 2019. It's just, Kyle's fed up. Give me the rookie with the rushing floor, at least, even if he's going to have some growing pains. I can call design runs for him. He can scramble. We can get really creative. And there's a natural avenue to fans being like, okay, I understand why they're making this change. The locker room will understand, hey, we're not winning games. We got to change something up. But the issue I would have, that I could see there being a huge problem, is if you start Trey Lance right away and he struggles, which is totally understandable, and that's a big that makes for a huge portion of the range of outcomes, because generally rookie quarterbacks are going to struggle. So if you start Trey Lance right away and he doesn't do very well, and you have to put in Jimmy, you're immediately going to have the people say, well, why isn't Jimmy in there? When Jimmy's in there, they win. Why can't this rookie win? And then let's say you hypothetically put Jimmy in and he starts playing really well. Well, in the moment, you'll be happy that the team's playing well. All of a sudden, it's going to be like, well, you spent all this capital. You moved 3 years worth of first-round picks up to get this quarterback, and you've made it 4 weeks into the season, and now you're back. You came crawling back to Jimmy G, and Jimmy G's rattling off wins now. It just creates a problem that I think would be much harder to sell to the team, to sell from a PR standpoint, and to just deal with as a head coach. So I think it's almost better to let Jimmy sort of play until he can't, if that makes sense. And again, I'm not saying that I think he's going to go out and play poorly, but if he played the way he played against Arizona week one last year, I could see Kyle getting very fit. And that was before the ankle.
Jordan, how the heck did he miss Kendrick Bourne in the end zone? How do you miss that throw? You can't. You're a starting quarterback. The game's on the line. KB beats Patrick Peterson to the back of the end zone. He's got at least 6 feet of separation. And Jimmy throws it late, and it's underthrown. You got to hit that throw.
Yeah, and so, this is the thing, is I'm a guy who's obviously not an NFL player. I'm a guy who sits here and who has Game Pass, who has the luxury of watching all 22.
I have it too. I got it too, Jordan.
So we're guys who have the luxury of sitting here after a play has happened, not being in the huddle with, huge defensive players trying to, take our heads off in the moment. It's way easier after the fact to look at a play and say, well, you should have done this. You should have done that. I totally concede that. But having said that, if you go back, it's not just last season. And I've watched the Super Bowl that they lost quite a few times just because the more I watch it, the more comfortable I get with it. It's not like I enjoy watching them lose, but I sort of was searching for answers and wanted some way to kind of accept how it happened.
The answer is Kittle is open over the middle. Jimmy, hit Kittle.
And that's the thing, is that there's a lot of throws, and it wasn't just in the fourth quarter. There was a lot of throws that were left on the table. And then this is the thing that happens is, and I understand I have an inherent bias that I try to push. Everybody has a slight inherent bias, but if you talk to people about that who don't want to concede that he could have been better, they'll bring up that he was 18 of 21 and how you only had 3 incompletions all game. How could you stop throwing the ball? But if you watch, a lot of those were check downs, and he was leaving throws on the field and taking lesser, there was a play in the
Debo end arounds were just off the charts. But go ahead, tell me about your play.
I think there was a play in the beginning. I think it was the first drive of the third quarter, if I recall correctly, or it was the first possession they had in the third quarter, and it was like a 3rd and 6 or 7. They were in Chiefs territory, between the 30 and 25. They weren't in the red zone yet. They were close, and Kittle was wide open over the middle, and Jimmy threw this little. It was like a little slant or a little crossing route over the middle to Tevin Coleman, and Coleman had a guy on his back. He literally caught the ball and was tackled. He didn't gain an inch, it seemed like, after he got the ball. And it was another situation where, yes, on the stat sheet that counts as a completion, but when you're watching the game, it left the opportunity to extend the drive to maybe turn what was a field goal by Robbie Gould into a touchdown. And we as Niners fans know how big that 4-point difference could have been. So I'm not blaming it all on him. They had a lot of things go wrong. But I'm just saying, the reason why I think Kyle zoned in on Trey Lance and the reason why he was so eager to make a move was as great as Jimmy can be, and I respect the amount of success that we got to experience with him as the starter. I loved that 2019 year as much as anybody. It was great. He deserves the respect for the play that he did make, but there's so many plays that he didn't make. And again, I'm just a guy that's going over stuff after it happened. I don't actually have to sit on an NFL field and make these decisions. And I'm not going to pretend like I'd know any better if I did. But I'm also not being paid $30 million a year to do these things, and he is. And that's where I think the front office and the coaching staff reached a point where they were like, you know what, I don't think we're getting the value that we thought we were going to get when we made this guy a franchise player. And what we like is quick release. We like his charismatic personality. We like the fact that a lot of the team rallies around him. There were many times watching, and you can go back, anybody who has Game Pass, you can go back and watch some of these games. There's visible frustration from Kyle Shanahan specifically with some of these throws where he's either overthrowing guys, underthrowing guys, missing reads, missing guys who are open. And I think that frustration just sort of ran its course. And it got to a point where they wouldn't be upset. If Jimmy ends up having this MVP caliber season and he goes crazy and they go to a Super Bowl and they win it, nobody in that building is going to be upset about it. But I think they reached a point where they were like, we have to have some sort of contingency plan. We have to create some sort of plan for if he doesn't work out anymore. We need
insurance.
Yeah, we need a guy who can step in because we're not in the we have a team that's ready to win now. We're not in a position where we can just go, hey, this guy isn't working at quarterback. Let's, tear it all down and rebuild it back up. They need a guy who can come in and step in, and that's part of the reason why I think they fell in love with Trey Lance so much, because he brings the rushing floor. Having a quarterback who can run gives you such a high baseline for your offense. Well, yeah, you might not be able to pull off some of these exotic passing concepts. You might struggle to identify coverage shifts and some things that are different at the NFL level. Just having the ability to run, like a perfect example is Taysom Hill with the Saints. The Saints went 3-1 with Taysom Hill as their starter last year. And no offense to Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill is not a very good quarterback. He's underthrows a lot of balls. He's not a great thrower of the football, but he's a very talented athlete. And just having the ability to make defenses respect you running the ball, it creates a level of consistent play that at the bare minimum you're getting a decent level of production from your offense because the quarterback can run. And then you couple that with the fact that Trey Lance is reportedly just soaking up the playbook and soaking up the installs and is great with the verbiage and is just this really high IQ, intellectual guy. And I think that Kyle just fell in love with that and all the things he could do, knowing that he felt comfortable that if I put this guy in a position to say, hey, if I'm calling this play call, you're going to look for this guy, and if this read isn't there, this is where you're going to progress. The alert route's doing this. If this is your hot read, all these things, I just think that it's at a point where, and again, this is just my speculation, this is just my opinion for anybody who cares to hear it. I think that that's where Jimmy Garoppolo struggles, is there's a lot of plays that I think he leaves on the field where he's just not processing things at the speed Kyle wants him to process them, and I think that's where the biggest disconnect is. And I've gotten better over time at objectively looking at it and trying to be more objective in my analysis of that. So I don't want to sit here and say, oh, he sucks, but there are plays where it's like I'm wondering what he's seeing. And if I'm feeling that way as a fan, I can only imagine how the guy calling the plays is feeling.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head there. And what I'm going to add to it is Kyle knows that the deep ball is not Jimmy's strengths. So now it's almost like his play design has to be limited by the quarterback position. But I want to move to the running back room because, man, it's interesting. Raheem Mostert, I love Raheem Mostert, but we need to dial back his touches. We can't expect to give him 12 to 15 touches week in and week out and expect him to hold up, in my opinion. Now, we bring in Trey Sermon. Wayne Gallman flashed with the Giants. So we have a good running back room, but I don't know who's going to lead this team in rushing. Jordan, if you had to pick a guy, let's say for fantasy purposes, who are you eyeing as that lead tailback?
So for fantasy purposes, I will say real quick, unless you're getting like great value later in the draft, I have avoided any Niners running backs for years just because they are consistently going to rotate these guys in and out. So unless it's a situation like last year when Mostert was hurt and like Jeff Wilson was clearly the guy when you had that game in New England, like, yeah, I'll pick up Jeff Wilson off the waiver wire or something. But there isn't a guy that really stands out to me where I'm like, man, this one's really going to take charge and lead. If I had to pick one, I would pick Mostert just because he has that big explosive ability. I think his vision is extremely underrated too. He sees holes and he gets to these holes because of that speed at a clip that's just extremely impressive. He averaged, I think, like 5.8, 5.7, if I remember correctly, yards per carry in 2019. I know he had the injuries last year, so we didn't get to see a full season of him as kind of like the guy. But it'd be between him and I think Trey Sermon's going to get a lot of run, especially with Jeff Wilson unfortunately being injured with that meniscus injury. I think that it's going to be a situation where Sermon he's not the explosive home run threat that I think Mostert is, and very few people are. That's nothing against Trey Sermon. But what I saw from Sermon was he was a guy who was consistently picking up chunks of yardage, 5, 6, 7, 8 yards, which goes a long way, especially over the course of a game when you're consistently eating up these small chunks of yardage. And that's another situation where I'm wondering if Kyle Shanahan's kind of evolving as a play caller a little bit. Because I know for a while his whole thing was every time we run the ball, we're trying to hit a home run. Every time, like he was very open about that. Every time we run the ball, I want guys to take it to the house, and that's why they had a lot of gains and rushes that were going for a yard, negative yards, like 3, like these. They didn't look very impressive, but then they bust these big runs because they're all designed to have these just massive holes on the outside and get guys to the second and third level. But I'm wondering now, taking a guy like Banks, taking a guy like Sermon, it seems like they're a little bit more inclined to start running a little bit more in between the tackles, have a little bit more power, maybe control the clock a little bit more by running that way. So I think those are the guys. And then another guy I'm really excited about that I don't think is getting talked about enough is I like Wayne Gallman a lot. I was shocked that he ended up on the Niners given how many people they had, how crowded the running back room was already. Gallman is a good running back. Like, he filled in great when Barkley was out last year for the Giants. I think he's a guy that'll definitely be a good player around the goal line as well. So I think it's going to be kind of a mix of all of those guys, but I still think Mostert's kind of the alpha in that room just because of his unique skill set.
Hey, I'm not going to argue with you there. I love Raheem Mostert, but yeah, I think it's going to be Raheem and Trey Sermon kind of as the 1-2, but yeah, with the sprinkle of Gallman, Eli Mitchell. We'll have to wait and see. Let's move to this defense. Now, the defensive line, Ebukam, I did a film breakdown on Ebukam where I watched all of his sacks, and he's got great power. Not the greatest hand usage. He doesn't have a ton of moves, but he's a great athlete, great power. But a guy that I'm eyeing to take a step, who had 0 sacks last year, Jordan, so you might call me crazy, but I really like Arden Key.
Yeah, that's fair. So they're not going to be as good as the 2019 line, and that's no disrespect to anybody now. The 2019 line was one of the best D lines I've ever seen, but I thought there was a noticeable difference in depth in 2019, 2020. They obviously lost Buckner at the top. They lost Bosa, but they also lost guys like Sheldon Day, like a Ronald Blair, and they lost some of these depth guys that really provided some insurance, especially when they were having the rotation on the D line, and you're going at 110 miles an hour the whole time. Like, it's good to have those guys that can replenish, and you're constantly having wave after wave of pass rush because that offensive line isn't substituting. So you're bringing in fresh legs on the D line while the O line sitting there, hands on their hips, out of breath. So Arden Key and Maurice Hurst, I was extremely excited about. I think that both of those guys were tremendous pickups. I don't know why the Raiders didn't make more of an effort to bring them back.
They wanted Solomon Thomas, Jordan. They had their eyes set on Solomon Thomas,
who I think I will do well for them. But I like Hurst specifically, I'm really excited about. I do think Arden Key will be a great pickup as well. Zach Kerr from Carolina is another guy I really like. They retained DJ Jones. I'm a huge DJ Jones fan. I think he moves so great for an interior lineman.
We are so deep on the interior. We're so deep. It's exciting.
You have Kinlaw, and then you're obviously going to have Armstead kicking inside. Then you have Ebukam, who can play outside with Nick Bosa. Maybe they get something out of D Ford this year. Maybe D Ford finally is able to play in a reduced role where he's strictly coming in for 25, 30% of the pass rushing snaps. I really like Jordan Willis too. I understand if people kind of just didn't care about little things last year because the season just felt like it was taken from everyone and it was kind of lost. But towards the end of last year, Jordan Willis he showed great bend around the edge. He's a great athlete. I think he's a guy where he's not going to be this transcendent talent, but he's a guy where if you put him in a position where you're literally just like, hey, your only job is to get after the quarterback. We're going to only put you in on pass rushing downs. We don't need you to have to defend run gaps. We don't need you to have to do any of these other things. We literally just want you to pin your ears back and rush the quarterback. I think you can easily end up with 5-6 sacks and a decent amount of pressures. So when I look at that D line, like they have a very strong group of pass rushers, I feel like. And obviously having Nick Bosa, it's not the same. He doesn't deserve the same level of praise that Aaron Donald does, but it's the same situation where when you have a Nick Bosa on the field, offensive lines are going to have to focus so much attention on him that it's going to open up things for other guys. It's just going to immediately make everyone else around him better. So I am really excited to see what they end up doing as a whole unit, because while it's not the same, front four that had 4 first-round picks we saw in 2019, the depth is much better than it was in 2020. And I think that having those wave of guys that can come in and having a Kerr and a Hurst and a Key and Willis, all these guys that can rotate in and give guys like Bosa who are coming off an injury and Ford who might be coming back from an injury a little bit more of a break and an ability to rest and whatnot in between reps, I think will be huge. So yeah, I'm very excited to see what the D-line can do. I think the defense as a whole looks really stout, honestly.
Absolutely. And we know we got Fred Warner, man in the middle. Man, Fred Warner, he's just good at everything. And the thing that I appreciate most about Fred Warner, a lot of times when linebackers or defenders at any position drop back into zone coverage, they just are defending grass. But Fred Warner has that awareness to know who's around him, like that interception he got on Mahomes in the Super Bowl, right? Tyreek Hill is in his area and he sees him, undercuts the route, interception. So Fred Warner, we all know he's all pro Fred. Dre Greenlaw, I feel like is a good player and a guy that I don't know why I've always liked him, because I feel like he's got good speed, and I also see he's got some good instincts, and that's Azeez Al-Shaair. But what do you think about this linebacking core with Warner and outside of Warner?
I think so. I think the other units are just so good that the linebacking core may look a little underwhelming just as a result. But, I really like Al-Shaair. I think Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles is another guy who, if he gets a good amount of run, I think he can be great. I always want to give a player a chance, and I don't want to ever sound like cold or cool, but I wasn't extremely excited about Nate Jerry just after what I saw in Philadelphia the last couple of years. But he's a guy, he's a veteran. They brought him in for a reason. They know something clearly that I don't, and their opinion matters way more than mine because they're the ones who are making these signings. And Greenlaw is interesting because I was there in Seattle. I was one of the best games I've ever seen. I was there when he tackled Hollister on the goal line. I know how much that moment really cemented his place among fans. And I understand that he is a guy who He's big play Dre. That's what they call him. I understand he has a knack for that stuff. I just think my whole thing that I don't understand is that I saw people, kind of dump on Quan Alexander for the year and a half he was here. And they were always talking about Quan Alexander was overshooting tackles. And
I'm guilty.
Okay, yeah, so I saw it a lot. I thought Quan Alexander was great personally. He was really good in coverage. That's one thing. When they had Quan Alexander and Fred Warner together in those nickel packages in coverage, they were phenomenal. And that's an area where I'd like to see Greenlaw improve a little bit. If I had any choice or say in the matter, I don't think that he's just actively not doing it to spite me. But if there was one area where I'd really like to see an improvement, it would be in coverage. And I think that Greenlaw, again, he's a guy that I think that he is a good player, and I think they got great value for him being a 5th-round pick, I believe he was.
Yeah.
I just think that a couple of those plays have led people to believe that he is at a level where I just, if I'm being objective and I'm putting like an analyst hat on, I wouldn't quite have him there. But again, for where he was taken and what he's been asked to do, I think he's a good player. I don't think that Drake Greenlaw is a bad player, but people that I see on Twitter regularly have it like he's this like stud, like Pro Bowl snub level player. Like, put it like this: Bobby Wagner's a great player and KJ Wright's a really good player. We all know Fred Warner's a great player. I don't think that like Drake Greenlaw is like a KJ Wright level player complimenting a player that we all know is really good. But that doesn't mean that he's a bad player per se. I just think that, and hey, he deserved it. I was there. I was thrilled. It was a hell of a play. But that one play, I think, got him a lot of equity. That maybe another. Again, like I saw Quan Alexander get dumped on all day on Twitter, and it never made sense to me because I thought Quan Alexander was really good. So I don't think Drake Greenlaw is bad. I just think that there are some things he can improve on, and I think that people overlook some of the things that he may struggle with because he has made big plays and big moments. And again, I totally understand that. That's what people do as fans. I get it. It just turns into like if you sit like there's been a couple times where I've pointed out things that I thought he can improve on, and people like run with it and they act like I'm saying the dude sucks, and it's like that's not the case at all. But if you want to have a nuanced conversation about it, there's definitely things that I feel he could improve on.
Absolutely, and everybody has stuff they can improve on, but he's serviceable. Now, let's move to the secondary where Jason Verrett was so darn good, and that was a guy, Jordan, that year of the draft was really one of the first years I started watching a lot of film, and I really liked Jason Verrett coming out of TCU, and he went like 2 picks ahead of Jimmy Ward. We took Jimmy Ward, and I was like, oh, man, I wanted Jason Verrett so bad. But we got him, and, man, he balled out so well last year. Emmanuel Mosley's a guy who I like. I did a breakdown where I watched all his snaps versus DK Metcalf, and I thought he held up pretty well against Metcalf. He got burnt one time for a big play, but I thought he did decent. So I like Mosley. K'Wan Williams in the slot, we know he's a baller. Robert Saleh asked K'Wan Williams to do so much, in terms of blitzing and just locking down the slot receiver. I wonder if D'Amico's going to use him in that same way.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I think that they got very lucky because in a normal year, I don't think there's any way they would have been able to retain K'Wan, and I don't think they would have been able to retain Tart either.
I was shocked.
They're very good players, and if it was a regular year where the cap wasn't in such a weird spot, teams weren't having this weird revenue deal because of COVID, I think they would be able to bring both back. The secondary, that's why the secondary really doesn't worry me. I hear all the time that people are concerned about I respect PFF and a lot of those bigger outlets talking about how bad the cornerback unit is and this and that. Like Verrett, if he can play, Verrett's another guy where his issue has never been talent. He's always been very talented. His issue has always just been health. He's had an unfortunate string of injuries. And then Mosley's another guy where he was an undrafted free agent, and he's another guy that's going, I believe he's going into his 3rd year or 4th year now. And he has gotten better each year. And it's, I know it's shocking, right? Like you get more reps, you're going to probably improve at whatever you do. So having Mosley and Verrett and K'Wan hold down the starting corner spots, I'm very comfortable with that. And then you have Jimmy Ward and Tart on the back end. I think the biggest thing with Tart is Tart's kind of, he seems like, I don't know him, so I don't want to say this, but just based off my perception, he seems like a kind of a quiet guy who keeps to himself for the most part. He's not overly brash on the field. He's not some guy that's, running up and flexing on the other team's sideline when he delivers these big hits. But he's a very good player. And I love Vish. Vish is one of the smartest people I've ever had the pleasure of talking with. And I know Vish has always kind of rode for Tart and tried to, emphasize to people how important he is. And I wish more people understood how much value he has. And same with Jimmy Ward. Jimmy Ward, the whole thing on him I always hear is like, oh, he doesn't get interceptions. He can't be a good safety. He doesn't get turnovers. I think that so much of that has to do with the fact that it's like, in my opinion, the best corners generally aren't racking up gaudy interception numbers unless they're getting them in zone, because guys aren't going to be throwing at a guy who's blanketed by the opposing DB. And I think Jimmy Ward has been so good covering guys out of the slot, covering tight ends, eating up a large portion of the field that teams aren't throwing at him as much. And having a safety who has the ability where you can line him up out wide, like these teams that kick out these big tight ends, and you can just throw Jimmy Ward on an island with a guy who's, got 5-6 inches on him and he's still shutting them down, or also having the ability to just play a standard 2-high look, a single high look, or bring him down in the slot corner role. He can blitz. He's really good at tackling in the open field. Like,
there's not many safeties in this league that can do what we ask Jimmy Ward to do, locking up players in the slot, play the deep third. Absolutely. And your love for Jaquiski Tartt, I love Jaquiski Tartt. He plays the run so well, how he shoots the gaps. He just has to take that collarbone out of the tackle, man. Keep that collarbone out of it. Find a way to stay healthy, because I love Jaquiski Tartt, and I'm happy that we got him back. And
he's a very good player. So I'd be interested. It's another situation where it's like I never want to put Super Bowl or bust labels on the season, but it really would be a nice year to see them make a run, because there's a lot of these guys who are very talented, and as much as I'm sure they love playing for the Niners and having us root for them as fans, they also have families to feed and they have money that they deserve to make. And the Niners, again, are in a position where they can't just re-sign. I was shocked they were able to do it this year. Next year, there's no way they'll be able to do it. It's just the way the cap's going, unfortunately, the situation that they will have to face. And it's going to be very hard to see a path where they can retain. It's going to be a K1 or a Jaquiski Tartt. It's not going to be a situation where you can just bring back both and be like, hey, it's whatever. That's the unfortunate reality of salary cap leagues.
And we've backloaded so many of these contracts. But anyway, I want to get to our last team, because I've kept you here a long time, and that's going to be the Seattle Seahawks. Let's see. I should be able to pull this up here. There we go. Let's pull up this depth chart that Seattle's rocking with, because we know they got some good receivers. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and a receiver I liked out of this draft was Dwayne Eskridge. What do you think about this receiving core?
So I actually think that it's pretty good. I thought Eskridge was overdrafted personally. That didn't make any sense to me. There was a player who I was shocked they didn't take instead.
Was it the kid from North Carolina?
Yeah, it was De'Ami Brown. I was shocked they didn't take De'Ami Brown. That's exactly who it was. Yeah. So I don't understand why they didn't take that guy, because I just thought Brown offered such a better skill set. And I like Eskridge. I had Senior Bowl credentials. I just, unfortunately, I was moving into a new place. It wasn't the right time to fly to Alabama and back on short notice. But I did get a lot of the virtual stuff, and a lot of people I worked with were there, and they liked him. He had a good performance, and all the tape that I got from my virtual credentials, he looked good. I had him as more of a back end of the third.
Yeah. I thought he went higher than expected, but he was a player who I had just enjoyed watching his film.
It was, those picks always on in a vacuum may not look good, but it's also a situation where I think Russell Wilson's so good at throwing the deep ball that if you get a guy who can really be fast and can separate like that, if Russ is going to get him the ball, having to defend him, Lockett, and Metcalf is going to cause a lot of problems for teams. They also have Gerald Everett now. They have a legitimate tight end, in my opinion. They have Will Dissly, who I think is a really good player if he can stay healthy as well. They have a good team. My whole thing with Seattle is that it's I don't know how, and I don't want to sound like a hater. I try to be as objective as possible, but I understand Russell Wilson's very good, and that plays a huge part in it. If you look at their team the last few seasons, they don't look impressive at all on paper. They have Russell Wilson and DK. It's a great connection. Lockett's a good receiver. Wagner's a great linebacker. KJ Wright was great, but they don't have a pass rush. Their secondary isn't very good. Their O-line has been awful, and yet every single year they're winning 10 or 11 games. And it's I understand Russell Wilson deserves a lot of credit for that. We got to give Pete Carroll a decent amount of credit for that. But it's almost infuriating at this point, because I'm a guy who likes to look at patterns and data and numbers and, again, objectively try to look at things. And I, for the life of me, cannot figure out how, because there's plenty of quarterbacks that are above average that are lifting up teams that are bad. But Russell Wilson's been doing it for so many years now, where it's he's good, but is he so good that he single-handedly is lifting up this roster that really is like the first 10 players you look at may be really good, but the 10 through 53, not really moving the needle for me too much. So I don't know how they're doing this year in and year out, honestly. Like, that's one thing for me that I don't understand is how every year they have this unit that's just consistently going to give teams problems. Like, every year, like, I have a lot of friends that are Seahawks fans. I'm like, oh, this is the year you guys nosedive. Like, your roster looks terrible, dude. Like, you guys aren't. You'll win 7 games, 6 games, something like that. And every year they're there in the playoffs, or they're giving the 49ers problems. They're, and this is one thing that's so funny to me is that the Seahawks always give the Niners problems, and the Niners have this hard time beating the Seahawks. The Niners always give the Rams problems, and the Rams have a hard time beating the Niners. But then the Rams also always beat the Seahawks. Like, each one has like their own kryptonite with the other. But then they beat one of the other teams really badly, but they lose. And it's like this dynamic that's gone on for like the better part of a decade. So it's like, no matter what the Seahawks look like, I will never take them lightly. And I feel like that's how, Rams fans should feel about the Niners at this point, and Seahawks fans should feel about the Rams. Like, whether, like, they're sitting there and they're like, oh, Russell Wilson's better than Jared Goff. This Rams O-line is depleted. They should look bad. They're still going into Seattle and kicking their butts in their stadium year after year. So it's like, it blows me away because, again, I want to sit here and give my objective, heartfelt analysis where I'm looking at the Seahawks team and I'm like, they don't have the same depth that the 49ers do.
Similar to the Rams. It's like they're top heavy, but again, like you said, they're winning games.
And at a certain point, I have to throw my bias and my, distaste for a division rival aside and just be like, damn, I have to give them credit where it's due. And it makes it very hard. Like, it's like at a certain point, you have to learn not to bet against a certain player or team. And that's how I've gotten with Seattle, where it's like, no matter how logically you look at this, where they look like this is the year it finally falls off. And like all the LOB guys, Legion of Boom guys, they all aged out. The defense is like their defense last year, especially the first couple weeks of the season, they were a historically bad defense. And they were winning these games. Like, I remember 2 specifically. They beat New England when New England called that really weird, they're not weird, but they called – everybody knew it was coming. They ran that QB power where Cam just gets the ball and it's like a QB draw, like a direct side QB run on the goal line. They stop him short and time runs out and they lose. And then that game against Minnesota where Minnesota literally needed like half a yard. And if they convert, they take 3 knees and the game's over. They don't get it. And then Russell Wilson marches 96 yards down the field and they score with no – like, they're winning these games where it's like that can't hold up over time. Like, yeah, you'll win a couple of those games here and there, but eventually you'll regress to the mean. But the team never does. They find a way and it's like it's infuriating because it's like I don't want to say they don't deserve it because they're winning, but it's frustrating where it's like you should be losing these games. And I don't want to speak for all because I have friends that are Seahawks fans, and I respect a lot of people who are Seahawks fans, but some of them they've never known what a bad team looks like. And it's kind of funny. That's like Patriots fans, like a lot of Patriots fans in their early 20s or whatever, that all they knew was Tom Brady. Like, I kind of want them to be humbled a little bit and understand what us as fans have had to go through for a struggling franchise a little bit. And the Seahawks, like, I'm waiting for it to happen. Because again, they had their rougher years before Hasselbeck and Sean Alexander and Holmgren and all that. But for the most part, they haven't really had to taste what it's felt like to be a struggling team and have to root for a team that's just objectively not very good. And it always seems like they're very close to it, and they win 12 games and they make the playoffs. So it's like, I've given up just holding on. It'll happen when it happens, but I'm not investing any more energy into being like, this is the year it happens, because I end up looking stupid every year as a result because of it.
Yeah, I mean, the main constant is Russell Wilson is just phenomenal. And this running back room, Chris Carson, great player. Rashad Penny, terrible pick. I mean, I know he's had some injury issues, but I'm just not a big proponent of taking running backs in the first round. So, I mean, he hasn't done anything for him. What do you think about this running back room?
I think Chris Carson's a really good back. He's another guy where it's injuries is his main setback. I am a big proponent of that. I don't think running backs are as valuable as some people think they are. The running game is extremely valuable. Being able to run the football will never not be important, especially at the NFL level. But I just think that it's a position that's more easily replaced than other positions, and that's why in a salary cap league, when you have to make tough decisions and allocate resources one way or the other, running back will generally be lower on my list. So they got Chris Carson in the 7th round. He was good for a few years. If they had let him walk and they replaced him with a cheaper option or something like that, then I think it would have been a much better pick or a better just outcome, because you're like, hey, we got him for as a 7th round pick. We paid him pennies for 4 years. Another team's going to break him off this huge chunk of money. They ended up paying him like $7 million a year or something like that, which isn't egregious. Like, he's a good player. But that's, again, where I'm looking at it, and I'm like I wouldn't do it personally. Like, he's a good player, but I think that you could get better production from, like, running back by committee. Like, I think you could spread 3 contracts out for the same price of 1. And then if you have an injury, you still have 2 other guys. You have 3 different skill sets. Rashad Penny's interesting. That pick never made sense to me, even when they made it. I always like Nick Chubb.
That was a great pick. Yeah, great pick, Seattle.
I don't know how they didn't take Nick Chubb, truthfully. That just didn't make any sense to me whatsoever.
And even Bill Belichick took Sonny Michel over Nick Chubb. When I was checking out those Georgia running backs, it was clear that Nick Chubb was the better player. And that's where I don't want to get started on Bill Belichick's drafting, because even Kyle Duggar, was Kyle Duggar a second or third round? Was it Kyle Duggar? Say the safety named Duggar? I thought he was not very good. And Bill ended up taking him early, like the second or third round. I don't know. I just went on a tangent there about my lackluster love for Bill Belichick's drafting.
Yeah, it's just, it's easy for us to sit here in hindsight and be like, oh, they should have done this. But like Nick Chubb, it seemed obvious. Just like you said, like watching Georgia when they had both of them, he looked like a much better running back. I think Nick Chubb's the second best running back in football. I think Dalvin Cook's the best, but I think just in terms of like a pure runner and the ability as a runner, Nick Chubb is phenomenal. And I think he would have been phenomenal for what Seattle likes to do. And the fact that they don't have him makes me very happy. But it's like, it blows me away. Like, what did you see from Rashad Penny? And like, they made some picks that I think are kind of questionable. Like Jordan Brooks, when they picked Jordan Brooks last year, I was kind of like, really? Like, it didn't make that much sense to me. But I think Jordan Brooks is a really good player, and he's going to end up starting for them this year unless they somehow magically bring back KJ Wright. He's going to end up being a starting linebacker for them, and he'll probably be in there for nickel sets with Bobby Wagner. So I just think that it's going to be really interesting to see, because like their defense is what gets me every year too. And no disrespect to Akello, I think he had talent. It was clear he had talent, but he was another guy.
He's the best cornerback in the league, Jordan. He said it himself. He's the best corner in the league.
He had moments where he looked. I never have seen him look like the best, but he had moments where he looked like a bona fide starting quarterback. He also had a lot of moments. I think his biggest thing was he played very undisciplined, in my opinion. He drew more PI penalties than any corner I can remember in recent memory that's played for the Niners. But again, Pete Carroll's a DB guru, so maybe he gets his hands on him and he turns him around. I'd be really interested to see what ends up happening with DJ Reed. If DJ Reed ends up, maintaining some sort of starting role, because I think he was good enough to. Trey Flowers has been a guy. It's funny. I have a lot of friends who are Seahawks fans, and they call him Ashtray because he's always getting burned. And I always thought that was kind of funny. Blair is an interesting guy. Blair is he hits very hard. I think he's got a lot of thump behind his tackles, but I don't think that kind of player really maintains that much value, especially with how quick they are to throw penalties for hits like that nowadays.
Yeah, that's 10 years. That's 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah. Like I love Dante Whitner. He was really fun to watch. Sean Goldson, guys like that. I don't know how much value you're getting out of them when they're laying those hits like that and they're costing you 15 yards. Even the plays where they're not actually penalties in real time, they're throwing it just because it looks the sound and how quickly they're getting hit. Like, it looks egregious. And then Jamal Adams is one where it's like, I don't know what to make of it, because if you watch his Jets tape, he actually looked really good for the Jets. Like, he had these moments where he was great in coverage. He was blitzing off the edge. He was kind of the star of this defense on a bad team where he could kind of, Greg Williams kind of let him do whatever he wanted. And then last year, the Seahawks, it's funny because people talk about how he had all these sacks. The Seahawks were basically lining up as an edge rusher at the line of scrimmage, and he was going unblocked because there was just more defenders than linemen to block people. And, well, yes, that's there. Sacks are always really good. Like, I think that's always something that I'm going to be excited to see. I wouldn't necessarily invest 2 first-round picks in the amount of money. The biggest thing with Jamal Adams, they're going to have to pay him a lot. They're going to have to pay him $16, $17 million if they want to keep him. And if they let him walk, it's going to look really bad that they traded 2 years.
They gave up so much for him.
Yeah, and he was just awful in coverage last year. And that's the biggest thing for me. If you're a defensive back, this isn't 20 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever, when you could get by just being a hard-hitting box safety. Like, you have to be able to cover. And, like, the Patriots game is the one that stands out to me the most, where Julian Edelman on him. I think they ran like 6 routes where they were matched up in man, one-on-one. And he had like 6 catches for like 157 yards and a touchdown. And like he was beating him like badly. And like Edelman had to retire this past year because of injuries, because his body broke down, and he was embarrassing Jamal Adams. And that's the biggest thing for me is I think he's a good player. I'm not trying to sit here and say I don't think he's a good player. I don't think he's nearly worth what they gave up for him. And I definitely don't think he's going to be worth the amount of money they're going to have to pay him as the highest or one of the highest paid safeties in the league. So it'll be really interesting to see what they do there. And then if you look at like the D-line, like, hey, I like Kerry Hyder. He was good for the Niners, but I also think he was just kind of a beneficiary of being on a good unit and a system that's very friendly to D-linemen. And I don't expect him to have anywhere near the same level of production he had there. LJ Collier was their other first-round pick from like 2019, who's another guy that pick didn't make much sense to me then. It still doesn't now. I like Darrell Taylor out of Tennessee, but he hasn't been able to stay healthy. Alton Robinson is one guy who I do really like. I think he was a great pick for them. I think he'll step up. But again, their D-line, and I love Poona Ford too. Poona Ford is one of my favorite players in the league. I hate that he plays for the Seahawks, but I like Poona Ford a lot. It's a great name. Poona Ford, it just sounds like a football name, you know? So I like Poona a lot. He's a great – because he's like 5'10", 5'11", I think. He's a small, compact guy, but he's a monster in the run game. And he just eats up O-linemen and frees up these other guys. So that D-line and that, just pass rushing unit really doesn't move. Like I said the same thing last year. I'm like, where are you guys going to generate pressure from? Like, you need to generate pressure if you're going to win in the modern NFL. And their way to generate pressure was to have Jamal Adams blitzing at an insanely high rate that's not sustainable. And I think that that's going to be very hard to maintain in the long term, because ultimately you're going to either have to play 2 safeties. You're going to have to keep 3 safeties on the field by having 2 guys that would play the regular safety positions and having Jamal Adams in the box, or you're going to end up playing a lot of single high, a lot more cover 3, and a lot of things that end up being exploited. So I just don't think it's sustainable long term. And I know they have Aldon Smith and a couple other guys. That's another thing that upsets me. I hate seeing the fact that Aldon Smith ended up there.
I know they always take our guys.
Yeah, and that's the hardest thing for me. So we'll see how it goes. But I just like that until they give me a reason to. I'm not going to really like that defense. Doesn't scare me at all. I think if you give Kyle Shanahan a healthy quarterback, a healthy supporting cast, he should be able to light that defense up. And that's another situation where I'm not too worried about it. And again, like the Rams, I don't want to take them lightly, but without Brandon Staley and with the players they lost, I'm not like there's not a defense in the league that I think the Niners or in the division, that I worry about the Niners not being able to maintain pace with and score with. It's more just, is the Niners defense going to be able to hold back some of these more explosive offenses? And that's where I really think that the Niners jump out more than other teams. Because, again, you look at Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald, it's really easy. Like, okay, well, the Rams had a number 1 defense last year. They have 2 of the best players at their positions, 2 of the best players overall in the league. The Rams defense has to be better. But if you're looking at it as a whole, I genuinely, objectively feel like the Niners defense is so much better than Arizona, LA, and Seattle, that while the offense might be a step behind, especially if they're starting a rookie, you have to feel really good about the fact that defense, no matter how much the league changes, defense will always be what wins championships ultimately. And as much as Tom Brady made a huge difference in Tampa last year, and they had the great skill position and they were scoring points, that Tampa Bay defense for me, and especially that pass rush with Shaq Barrett and Vita Vea coming back and some of these guys, really is what tipped the scales for them. And, Devin White gets a lot of love, but Levante David was a superstar in that game, and he's been so good for so long. I'm glad he finally got a ring. He's a player who's always deserved one in my eyes.
And the rookie safety, I love the rookie safety.
Oh, Winfield was great too. And that's the thing. When we look at Tom Brady, and Tom Brady deserves a lot of credit too. They were 7-19 the year before with a lot of the same players. I totally understand that. But I'm just saying, ultimately, they had a defense that Kansas City didn't. And while I think Kansas City's offense was better than Tampa's offense, they ended up getting routed because that defense advantage was so much greater in favor of Tampa. So if the Niners can replicate some of that same success, where you're matching up and you both, we have the Niners hopefully have this explosive offense. The Rams probably will. Seattle probably will. But that Niners defense is just tough and gritty and getting to the QB. I definitely can see a path to them winning this division. I'm not super confident. I don't think that I'm just, going to be able to go into this year and just, the Niners are going to dominate, because this division's easily the best division in football. It's going to be very tough. I think the Cardinals objectively are the worst team, and I think that they would be a playoff team in almost any other division based on how good the roster is. But the Niners are, as a whole, extremely just solid 1 through 53, and they have a great coaching staff. They have a good mix of young players who can contribute and guys that are veterans who are familiar with the league and the system. And thank you very much, Gavin. I really appreciate it. Very grateful to be on. This has been really fun, man. I'm not gonna lie. I've gone a little while without talking football, so it's good to get on here with you and discuss these things.
Hey, Jordan, I'm very grateful that you gave me 2 hours of your time. Gavin's from the UK. So, Gavin, you're the man. Jordan, I'm going to get you out of here with this last question. And by the way, thank you for giving me so much of your time. Rankings you said you got Arizona 4, it sounds like. I want to hear 1 through 4. Jordan, what you got?
So I have Seattle at 3 right now, and I know I went on that whole tangent about how I don't want to ever discount the Seahawks, but I just think that it's a situation where they're not in a position where they could absorb losing players and if they have a season like the Niners had last year in terms of injuries and stuff, which was pretty unprecedented. Even if they had half of that, I don't think that they could stay afloat. And they're also going to be playing a first-place schedule due to the fact that they won their division last year. I think that's something that gets overlooked a lot of times through these predictions. So I'd have them 3. I have the Rams at 2 currently, and again, it's just because I think depth-wise, the Niners are in a much better position to gut out a 17-game schedule based on the amount of depth they've amassed. And I think that if Jimmy's the guy, they're more than capable. They've proven they can win games. They swept the Rams with Jimmy. They swept the Rams with backup QBs. They've proven that they can win those games head-to-head. I more expect them to split this year. I don't think the Niners get both from the Rams again. Just they're too good of a team. But the Rams will also be playing in a more difficult schedule. That's one thing that did benefit the Niners in that down year where just the sky was falling and nothing was going right. Now as they're regrouping and coming together healthy next season, they'll be playing a 4th-place schedule, and that's going to go a long way because while they'll have the tough 6 games within the division, when they get that Week 17 game, and it's against a Bengals team that I don't expect to be very good, and the other 3 teams are playing tougher competition, that ultimately might prove to be the difference. But I think it's going to be a situation where I don't expect there to be one team that's, like 13-4 or 14-3. I expect every team to be somewhere between 8 to 12 wins. And whoever ends up winning the division, it's going to be probably on the last week of the season, maybe the second to last week. Like it's going to be a hard-fought battle. It's not going to be like 2019 where, Seattle did, linger and hang in there for a bit. But the Niners, in my opinion, were pretty clearly the best team. 2018, the Rams were clearly the best team in the division. I don't think we'll get that this year. I think it's going to be really hard fought. But objectively looking at it, I just feel so good about the Niners' depth that for me goes such a long way. And, worst case scenario, they end up finding a way to sneak into a wild card or something like that. I think that they're capable of going and winning games on the road now that they've been through the gauntlet of a playoff run. A lot of those core players have experienced what it's like to face that adversity. So, that would be my 1 through 4 now, and that could change if injuries happen in camp or something like that. Like I don't want to be held to that because I'll do one way before, like right before the season starts. I'll do like a definitive final one, but until proven otherwise, that's how I would have to shake it out. And part of me would want to say, well, the Rams and Seahawks have been better more consistently than the 49ers. But the one year that we saw a complete 49ers team with a healthy quarterback under Kyle Shanahan, they were the best team in football, in my opinion. And if I'm basing everything on an optimistic outlook where I'm not expecting injuries to happen at a catastrophic rate, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and think that they can replicate similar success to what they had the last time that they were healthy as a whole unit.
Jordan, you just killed that. And you know what? We have the same rankings because I'm not a Cliff Kingsbury guy. I've got the Cardinals at 4, followed by the Seahawks at 3, the Rams at 2. And then if it's, this division's so tough that I got to put the Niners 1. I want to roll with my squad. But Jordan, you know what? I'm grateful. Thanks for coming on. And if there's anything you would like to share with the audience before I get you out of here, now would be the time.
Just if I've tried to now it's been a little bit of downtime, so I'm not posting every day as much, but I do try to post like film clips and cut-ups and stuff. I have, like I said, like hundreds of hours of cut-ups that I've made. So I try to, get out and share as many as possible because I know a lot of people either don't have the time or don't care to go through Game Pass and watch a bunch of old stuff. But if you follow me on Twitter, my handle's, on the screen there at /_cousin. I do try to get out a good amount of 49ers content fairly regularly and share, any data, analytic points, stuff like that. Because I enjoy talking about it, but I also know, like I said, like I love doing this, and I do a lot of it in my free time. So if it can help somebody else out with a film clip they haven't seen or a stat about a player they haven't seen, that makes me feel really good about it. I do write for 49ers Goldmine as well. It's been kind of a slow point since OTAs ended. There's not too much to talk about, but as training camp ramps up, I will be increasing my coverage with them and doing a little bit more audio and video stuff as well. So if you want to follow me there, I'd greatly appreciate it. If you want to go check out 49ers Goldmine, whatever, we got a great group of writers there that are putting out good content. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And, I appreciate you having me on, Eric. It's been a great time. If you ever, want to do this again, let me know whenever. I'd be more than happy to. I had a great time talking with you. And I appreciate everybody that, stayed and watched, and appreciate what I have to say.
Thanks a lot. Make sure you like and subscribe. Catch you guys next time.